Chapter 377. By the time Sillin and the others returned to the base at Sector Z, Mo Heng's fighter was almost done. The materials Sillin brought back made Mo Heng very happy. Previously, some of Mo Heng's designs were left unfinished due to the lack of materials, but now that he had the materials, he could start working on those deleted designs again. Tang Qiuqiu was still crouching in the shooting range all day long, but her training method had changed a little. Guanfeng must have taught her something like this before. Sillin had seen Goryo and the others use a similar training method, and he knew that it was more suitable for the PTS. Sillin didn't know what their new plan was, but judging from the eager look on Shimu's face, it was obvious that it was going to be a great idea. Shimu wasn't the only one who was crouching in the shooting range all day long. Shimu wasn't the only one. He noticed that Moon and Sigma often went in to help out with their precious chest as well. Could it be related to Sigma and Moon's brothers who were killed back then? Sillin didn't have the time to think about it. The first thing he did after returning to his base was check the information Yudi had compiled. Food King Hara's food empire had entered Sector V, and they had contacted Akenthis of the Freedom Army. Both sides were working well together, and the Freedom Army was starting to rise to power. The Freedom Army was already a powerful force to begin with, but it only grew stronger after they joined forces with Food King Hara. Food King contacted me while you were away and asked you to give him a message when you returned. Yudi told Sillin everything that had happened recently and conveyed the Food King's message to him. Is there any news from the Robert family? Sillin asked. Not yet. They seem to have calmed down again. Yudi was very curious about this. Previously, they had been making a huge ruckus, but now they had suddenly stopped. Some people said that the Robert family was afraid of the Hunter Regiment's protests, so they didn't take any further action. Do you believe this? I don't believe it, Yudi shook his head, although I don't know much about them, but from the information I've received, once the people of that family become stubborn, it's very difficult for them to stop. Moreover, they aren't people who are afraid of trouble. I heard that this time, the Robert family's robot army showed great power. Sillin looked at the few brief scenes on the screen, then pointed at the screen and said, "That's it." The holographic screen showed the scene of the Robert family's robot army swallowing up a small hunting squad. However, there were only a few scenes and they were too short. Moreover, many of the details were blurred. It was clear that they had been edited. Yes, we can only get these images. There's nothing else. These images seem to have been purposely released by them. Purposely releasing it was for two reasons. Firstly, it was to intimidate, and secondly, it was to create a sense of mystery. Although the hunter group that had been swallowed had reformed after the Star Alliance had descended into chaos, it was not easy to swallow this hunter group. Furthermore, only a group of robots had gone to carry out the mission, not humans. There's no way the Robert family could have done it this cleanly. They must have received help from the military and other forces, Yudi said. Sillin understood all of this, but he didn't know who they were and what their goal was. Was their ultimate goal the four great forces? After Yudi left, Sillin contacted Hara. On the holographic screen, Hara was still the same chubby guy who looked like he could barely walk. You're busy, aren't you, kid? Hara looked very satisfied. It looks like the market you've opened up in Sector V is pretty good. Hara waved his short and fat fingers and smiled until his flesh was sticking out. You're the one who introduced me to you. They're pretty good. I've actually read their information before, but I can't come into contact with the three young leaders of the Freedom Army at all. They don't trust outsiders, or should I say, they don't trust anyone except the three of them. They don't even trust their own subordinates. That being said, they gave me a lot of face when they heard that you were the one who introduced me to them. Don't be humble. Being overly humble is too fake. With your title as the Food King, coupled with the development needs of the Freedom Army, your cooperation will go smoothly even without my introduction. I'm not being humble. Oh right, I wasn't the one who was looking for you a few days ago. It was someone who was looking for you, but it wasn't convenient for her to do so. Who is it? The Freedom Army's Qing. As expected, the call was transferred after Hara said a few words. Sillin could trust Hara's communication, and Qing wasn't a sloppy person either. He could rest assured that the communication was confidential. The Qing that appeared on the holographic screen was wearing a cloak, a hat, and a mask. However, Sillin knew that this person was the one who was on the verge of death. I'm sure you know who I am already. Thank you for your help last time. It was impossible to tell if the person on the holographic screen was male or female, but she didn't hide her identity at all. Anna and Blue were both her names. No one in Sector V could guess her double identity and double secrecy, and not even the Andrea family could guess it. It was obvious that Blue had disguised herself very well. I'm glad that you've recovered. Is there something you need from me? Sillin cut straight to the chase without beating around the bush. There is. However, whether or not it will work depends on whether or not you have the intention. Qing's tone was a little mysterious. I'm all ears. Qing took out a palm-sized projector and pressed a button. A planet appeared on the projector, and judging from the data flashing at the side of the projector, it wasn't a big planet. Although it wasn't big, there were some tiny flashing dots of light on the rotating projection. Sillin raised an eyebrow. An energy ore. That's right. Qing turned off the projector and continued. This is a planet we discovered by accident. However, a few forces are already paying attention to it. You're from Sector V? That's indeed the case. In the past, because that place was an uninhabitable zone and the magnetic field in the surrounding star zone was often abnormal, everyone avoided that area. Later, after someone rushed in and came out alive, that planet began to attract attention. How many people are watching it? Sillin asked. At least 5 forces including us. A pause later, Qing continued, all of them are from Sector V. Most of the people in Sector V were not afraid of death. If they really went crazy, it would be a real headache. However, the investigation information that Qing took out next moved Sillin greatly. Or rather, it didn't matter if it was a hunter, a merchant, or a soldier. If my estimation is correct, the purest part of the energy ore on this planet is comparable to Olillo's White Knight. Qing's tone was filled with uncontrollable excitement. This was what drove people crazy. The energy ore called White Knight inside Olillo's cage had been divided up by the military and political people a long time ago, and the hunters didn't get much. Although everyone said that White Knight was replaceable, there was no reason not to eat such a big cake when it was placed in front of them. Carrie and the others would probably go crazy if they knew about this. What do you think? Interested in a partnership? Qing asked. Although the Freedom Army's rise was fast, there were a lot of people eyeing that planet this time. If they really clashed head-on, the Freedom Army would suffer a lot of losses. If they were to shrink because of this planet, there was no telling when they would be able to recover. After all, there were too many people who wanted to kill the Freedom Army while they were weak. But if they could ally with Sillin, then things would be different. There were a lot of energy ores on the planet anyway, so sharing a share with Sillin wasn't a bad idea. Just like Aiken thus said they could return a favor. When do you guys move? This was Sillin's biggest concern. They still had a lot of preparation work to do. 15 to 20 days according to the galactic calendar. Qing answered. During this time, all parties were making preparations to go to that planet. If they didn't make perfect preparations, they might die in space before they reached their destination. Give me half a day. Sure. Sillin had half a day to consider whether he should accept this job or not. He went to check on Mo Heng's progress. The fighters were in the final stages of finishing up. Sillin gathered all the team members for a meeting and asked for everyone's opinion. As expected, the moment they heard that there was an energy ore comparable to White Knight, Carrie and the others became excited and rubbed their palms together. The others were about the same. About the fighters, Mo Heng waved his hand. You don't have to worry about that. 10 days is more than enough time. The rest of the finishing work doesn't have to be done here, it can be done in the starship's warehouse. What about you guys, Shikai? Sillin looked at Shikai, who was rubbing his chin thoughtfully. We're fine with it. The starship is fully equipped anyway. Shikai didn't just bring back the materials from the Mist Bodhisattva sect. He also prepared several sets of equipment. One for the base, one for the space fortress, one for the Little 11 starship, and the rest for backup. Hui Mao bounced on the side. That's settled then. Silin, we're definitely going. That's all money, we can sell it even if we don't use it for ourselves. Silin patted the restless cat's head and said, then get ready. I'll let everyone know once I'm done. After the meeting was adjourned, Mogaz gathered together with Carrie and the others. Sigh, Carrie, I'm starting to think that joining the 11th squad was a wise choice. Not only do we have a custom-made fighter, armor, luxurious food, and now we're even running into a top-tier mission like this. It really makes my blood boil. Silin is such an amazing captain. Carrie chuckled. Why else would Silin be called the captain? The 11th squad wouldn't exist without him. Xiao Shang patted Mogaz on the shoulder. Do your best. You'll get a bigger bonus if your results are good, you know. After Silin replied to Green, they came to an agreement and set a time for Silin to meet up with them at Sector V at the coordinates Green had given him. On the other side, Green had ended his call with Silin. He looked at Aiken thus and in Raisin and said, it's done. In Raisin wiped his gun and said, isn't the 11th squad a new squad? And it's just a Vanguard sub-squad. It can't even be called a fleet. I'm afraid that they'll become a burden when the time comes. Aiken thus shook his head. Silin is a strange man. The 11th squad may be small, but Silin is a very capable man. Back at Sector H, I thought he was a member of some big family or something. There's no way we could have escaped so easily otherwise. That's what I'm curious about as well. He's a hunter from the Big Four. Although he's just a sub-squad member, not even a sub-squad leader can mobilize all of Sector H's personnel, can he? Plus, he's acquainted with Food King, Green said. Aiken thus paused for a moment before continuing, I didn't ask him to join this operation just to return a favor. I wouldn't have made this decision if they were weak. What? In Raisin stopped wiping his gun and looked at Aiken thus. During my conversation with the Food King, he revealed something. Silin is connected to that side as well. Aiken thus raised 3 fingers and pointed at the sky. Both Green and in Raisin understood the gesture. It represented sectors A, B, and C. The fact that they were able to receive help from people from those 3 sectors meant that their evaluation would go up a whole new level. Inside the 11th Squad's base. Inside Moon's small room, a set of high-quality audio and video equipment was playing a small X-ray. However, Moon's attention wasn't on it. Now that Moon had controlled himself from interfering with other equipment while he was thinking, the reason he turned on the audio and video equipment was so that he wouldn't be discovered by anyone else in the base. Moon, Shikai has produced the complete plan. Once it's complete, the new robots will be produced very soon. Sigma said while flying in with the box in his arms. Moon rubbed his chin and moved his fingers. Then he turned to Sigma and asked, Are you happy with the 11th Squad, Sigma? Of course I am. The 11th Squad has you, Wheeze, Cheto, and now the descendant of the Shi family. Silin has helped me a lot as well. Everyone in the 11th Squad is great. Right now, I'm just waiting for Ruifia and Zoel to wake up and Chip to recover. Then, the 5 of us can join the 11th Squad, Sigma replied with a tilt of his head. The blue bars on his face narrowed. Of course I am. Moon spread his arms like he was stretching himself. Then he rose to his feet. Where are you going, Moon? Sigma followed closely behind him. I'm going to talk to Silin about our pay. I don't think that's a good idea. We're all living here. I might be the one who built most of the base, but, no buts. Let's go check your orchard. Don't let the trees die when we depart, and bring more fresh fruits with us. Silin was a little surprised by Moon's arrival. He was reading through the information Qing had given him, and it was no wonder that the environment around the planet wasn't very good. No wonder so many people had gone in there and never returned. Even the Freedom Army had only probed the planet from afar. They hadn't actually entered it. Among the information Qing sent him, Silin noticed that none of the people who went in search of the planet had ever returned. The ones who escaped only stayed on the planet's surface. The survivors brought back news that the people who went in met the spirits, so they couldn't come back. That was why everyone was spending so much time preparing for the expedition. If they weren't prepared, they would only die. They didn't believe in ghosts. It was either a strange species or an illusion. Silin didn't put the information away when Moon entered the room. Instead, he spread it out on the ground. What is it? I have something to tell you. It's about this planet? Sillin touched the projector next to his arm with a finger, and the image of the planet appeared in front of him. At first glance, it looked no different from any other non-habitable planet, but upon closer inspection, there were a lot of shining spots on the planet due to reflections. Moon tilted his head and looked at Sillin. He seemed to be curious about Sillin's words. Yes, it's about this planet. Moon flew to the side of the projection and looked at the planet. Although there were only flashing lights on the surface, Sillin could feel that Moon was looking at the planet seriously. White Knight is actually not the name of the energy ore. Sillin looked at Moon, who was staring at the planet intently. He didn't say anything and waited for Moon to continue. White Knight was once called the White Spirit. Spirit? Moon raised a finger, and the tip of the finger spread out, projecting an image. It was a girl in white. Her skin color, hair color, pupil color, and eyelashes were all white. Her white hair that reached her ankles fluttered as if there was a wind blowing. There was a childlike innocence in her eyes, but deep inside this innocence was indifference, mechanical indifference. She doesn't have a physical body. She's just a program, a living program. Master told me that before the 5 of us appeared, they had done many experiments, and the best result was White Knight. However, because she couldn't make a physical body like us, she was left there to guard the remaining energy ores. When Moon said this, Sillin understood. The top-grade energy ores that Qing mentioned were actually the White Knight in Olillo. The man-eating specter on the planet mentioned in the information was actually a guardian created by the Shi family back then. Then why are you telling me this now? Sillin asked. Moon never took the initiative to talk about it. Even when Sillin mentioned the planet, Moon didn't come over immediately. He must have thought about it for a while before deciding. I want to bring White Knight over. I don't care who the energy ores belong to. I hope you can help us bring White Knight back in one piece. When the time comes, I will negotiate with White Knight. We haven't met, but I have a message left by Master. Just don't destroy this area. Moon pointed to a place on the planet. That was the place with the most energy ores. It was not easy to protect that place from being destroyed. I'll try my best. Thank you. Moon looked at Sillin and said mysteriously, White Knight is very powerful. There is a reason why he was called a ghost. So, if you can bring White Knight over, it will be good for you. Chapter 378. It didn't matter what kind of thing Moon was referring to as the White Spirit. The most important thing right now was to get everything ready. After Moon told Sillin about White Knight, he also told him about the planet's surroundings. Although Moon had never been there himself, the information stored in his memory hadn't faded even after 1,000 years. It was of great help to Sillin. After getting the information, Sillin adjusted the parameters of the base's simulated training ground so that Carrie and the others could get used to it as soon as possible. That way, it would be easier for them to get to their destination. Sillin also shared some of the information Moon had given to Achenthus. After all, they were going to be working together. Sillin's side didn't have many people, so they might need the Freedom Army's help when they got to their destination. Hunters were always in a hurry. They weren't people who could stay in the same place for long. After being cooped up in the base for so long, Carrie and the others were itching to go out. Before this, they were doing hard labor around Mo Hung because of the space fighter. Now that the fighter was ready and they had a mission, they spent most of their time training in the simulated training ground. With their gene rank and good physical fitness, they quickly adapted to the environment Sillin had set up. This time, they didn't wear normal protective suits. Instead, they wore armor made by Shimu. Perhaps the next mission would be the time when the armor would come into play. They were just getting used to it, so they were looking forward to the real hunting ground. They left the base on a starship and headed to the coordinates Sillin and Achenthus had agreed to meet. The fighter was almost complete. Mo Hung told Carrie and the others to try it out when they had time. He wanted to see if there was anything they weren't satisfied with. If there was, they could modify it so that they wouldn't get into trouble on the battlefield. Carrie and the others were overjoyed by the fighter jets Mo Hung had created. These were fighter jets that belonged to them and were not for public use. Every fighter jet was designed and built according to their personal characteristics and preferences, unlike the bulk-bought fighter jets they had seen in other squadrons. Other than the design, the materials used to build these space fighters were incredibly hard to come by. If Sillin hadn't obtained a batch of rare materials from the Mist Bodhisattva Empire, these space fighters might not have been able to achieve the results Mo Heng was satisfied with. As for where Sillin got the materials from, Mo Heng didn't ask. Sillin had Sillin's secrets. He respected that. Lying on the shelf, Hui Mao closed his eyes and thought about his next move. He was no longer the ignorant cat that followed Sillin out of the base, and there was no need for him to restrain himself anymore. If he wanted to fight, he could fight no matter the form. As for those eccentric researchers, Hui Mao wasn't afraid of them anymore. Now that he had someone to rely on, he wasn't afraid of them. Although Hui Mao wasn't happy with the fact that this batch of energy ores had to be split equally with the Freedom Army, he had no choice but to endure it. They were partners after all, and the worst that could happen was that they would take the lion's share. However, Hui Mao wouldn't allow a third party to interfere. The other forces of Sector V could just eat shit. Before they met up with the Freedom Army, Sillin explained the operation plan to everyone. The place Ayu mentioned was a key protected area, and since Sillin had promised Ayu, he would prioritize it over everything else. He would protect White Knight even if the energy ores were occupied or destroyed. Sector V's reputation in the League of Stars wasn't good. It was a former colonial sector and a region known for its crimes. After the League of Stars fell into chaos, Sector V, which hadn't been completely controlled by the military yet, took this opportunity to develop wantonly. Although the flames of war raged everywhere, there was one area in Sector V that very few people went to, and that was the area Blue had mentioned to Sillin. There were basically no habitable planets in that area, and there weren't many mineral deposits on the planets at the edge of that area. Coupled with the harsh environment of the universe, very few people would venture into that area. The equipment required to enter that area was relatively high, and high-level equipment was always linked to a huge amount of money. Even the rich colonists of Sector V wouldn't want to waste their money to explore that seemingly empty area. That was why the planet containing the best energy ores could be preserved to this day. Otherwise, it would have been emptied a long time ago. When the starship arrived at the agreed coordinates, the Freedom Army was already waiting for them. There were no large starships or spaceplanes, only small and medium-sized spaceplanes scattered around. One reason was because of the Freedom Army's financial limitations, and the other was because this lineup allowed them to move more efficiently. The spaceplanes weren't fancy, but they were all heavily armed models. They looked full of killing intent, and some of the spaceplanes even had holes and wounds caused by cannon bombardment. You fought already? Sillin looked at Tenthus on the light screen. They're just some annoying minions, no big deal. Tenthus said. The murderous intent in his blood-red eyes hadn't faded completely yet. Sillin noticed that Blue and Inrainer were standing behind Tenthus. Aren't you afraid that something unusual might happen inside the base? Tenthus smiled and didn't answer. Sillin believed that they should have already made arrangements. However, the three of them always seemed to move together. Sillin didn't ask too much about the Freedom Army. After discussing their next move with Tenthus, the two of them flew towards the planet together. In the Freedom Army, many people looked at this unfamiliar starship and discussed it. They didn't understand why they had to call others for an operation. Although the starship looked good, war wasn't about whose flying tool was beautiful. On this side, the Freedom Army members were discussing Sillin and the others in their spaceplanes. The spaceplanes were also communicating with each other through their communicators. In the end, just as they were mocking the unfamiliar starship, an angry voice sounded. Fuck you, you're the flashy ones. You're the embroidered pillows. You're the fucking trash. The three leaders in Tenthus's spaceplane looked at each other, surprised that their own communication channel would hear the voice of the other person. Sillin finally spoke up after the gray cat had yelled for a while. I'm very sorry. One of our team members is a little too hot-tempered, but forgive me for being blunt, but your communication security measures are seriously terrible. Hearing Silin's words, Achenthus contacted the people in charge of the spaceplanes. Each spaceplane was a team with a team leader. Achenthus asked the team leaders to check their communicators and communication network and turn on the security facilities. No matter what, they couldn't be careless. Although Huemao's shout made the Freedom Army unhappy, it calmed down a lot. I didn't mean to hear it. It's their communication network that's wide open. They didn't even set up low-level security. You can't blame me for that, Huimao said while licking his claws. He was originally not satisfied with giving a part of the energy mine to the other party. Now that he heard those people talking bad about him, it would be strange if he didn't flip out. Silin patted Huimao's head. Alright, don't waste time paying attention to the Freedom Army. Pay attention to other places further away to see if there are any abnormalities. For example, someone who isn't part of the plan. Someone who isn't part of the plan? Huimao flicked his ears. He didn't quite understand Silin's meaning, but since Silin had said so, he had no choice but to pay attention. The space environment in this area wasn't very good. There were a lot of rocky areas, and there were often strong ion storms. As a result, their speed was a lot slower than usual. The route Silin had chosen was based on the information Moon had provided him. It was also one of the easiest routes out of all of them. Although they ran into a lot of trouble, they still successfully reached their destination coordinates ahead of the other forces in Sector V. The Freedom Army was very happy about this. Can you contact White Knight? Silin looked at Moon. Moon shook his head. Not yet. I need to enter the planet to communicate with her. Who are you guys talking about? Carrie moved closer to Cheto and asked. Moon tilted his head. We're talking about Cheto's girlfriend. Cheto. Why didn't he know when he found himself a girlfriend? Oh, not far away, a group of people moved closer to Cheto. Even Mao, who usually didn't pay much attention to gossip, couldn't help himself. They were just too curious. Cheto's girlfriend? A robot's girlfriend? Alright, everyone, get ready to move. You'll know when the time comes. Also, do your best and don't embarrass the 11th squad. Silin patted the group of people who had gathered around him and said. Carly and the others hesitated for a moment, but in the end, the mission was more important. That being said, I'm really curious. We're ready to land, Alkenthus said on the screen. All right. Silin gestured to everyone, and they all got to work. The 11th squad's starship was left outside the planet. Since they had the super AI Little 11, they didn't have to worry about piloting the starship even if there was no one around. Speaking of which, space fighters flew out of the starship one after another. Their streamlined bodies and shape were clearly different from normal fighters, and they flashed across the dark universe like phantoms. Alkenthus stared at the image on the screen. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't envious, but he was still surprised. From what they knew, Vanguard didn't have a fighter like this in their B squadrons other than their famous Freedom ship. The detectors couldn't detect anything. None of our scanning methods detected anything. Inderson pointed at the image on the screen. All they saw was the enemy's fighter flying out of the starship, disappearing in a flash, and then vanishing into thin air. Unfortunately, the detectors on the space plane didn't detect anything at all. Instead of piloting a fighter, Silin piloted a small space plane and carried Mo Heng, Cheto, Tang Chiochio, Shuechio, and Chi Feng out of the planet. Old Mo was the one who strongly requested to tag along. He was very curious about this planet, and he wanted to see the alluring top-grade energy ores there. There weren't any plants on the planet, only rocks and mountains embedded with energy ores. After the Freedom Army landed, they put on their protective suits and started mining. Since the other forces hadn't arrived yet, they decided to dig a bit first. Meanwhile, Silin parked the space plane at the place Moon told him to. After opening the hatch, Moon and Sigma flew out of the space plane. While the Freedom Army was digging excitedly, a white light suddenly appeared around them. It was the energy ores that didn't glow themselves. It illuminated the dimly lit area for a long time. Who are you? A gentle voice entered their ears. Then, a white figure appeared on top of the oars. They were all the same, and their movements were exactly the same. It almost looked like they were clones. A snow-white white knight was sitting on top of the oars. Her long hair and long skirt were flowing in the wind as she stared at the miners. She was twirling a strand of her white hair with one hand and combing it with a comb with the other. "A wraith!" someone exclaimed. Since Alkenthis had told them not to attack if they saw a wraith and that someone else would deal with it, all they had to do was dig as hard as they could. That was why the Freedom Army didn't open fire immediately when White Knight appeared. Although that was the plan, when everyone saw this white figure, they all felt a chill down their spines. Be it the Freedom Army soldiers who were closer to White Knight or Carrie's group who were patrolling in fighter jets, they couldn't help but feel goosebumps all over their bodies. Not fearing death was one thing, but the fear of seeing a wraith was another. What the hell is this? A projection? After White Knight appeared, Moon started communicating with her using the method his master left behind. Although White Knight, Sigma, and Moon had never met each other before, they were all created by the Shi family in the same area. Plus, Sigma took out some information that belonged to his master. It didn't take long for them to communicate with each other. It wasn't long before a passageway opened up at Moon's location. After greeting Sillin, Moon and Sigma descended into the passageway. The passageway closed behind them, and White Knight's projection disappeared. Now that the wraith was gone, the Freedom Army soldiers returned to their mining. They were curious, but the energy in front of them was far more attractive. Just as Alkenthis was wondering why Sillin hadn't made a move yet, he saw a slightly larger spaceplane land. Many big guys that looked like mining robots walked out of the spaceplane and began mining with familiarity before transporting them into the spaceplane. Alkenthis glanced at Sillin, who was still sitting inside the spaceplane. He had to admit that he was jealous. Although the 11th Squadron had fewer people, they had more robots. Mining and other tasks were done by the robots. They were all professionals and could dig quickly. They were not slower than the Freedom Army. Hui Mao wasn't the type to stay put for long. It ran out the moment Sigma and Moon came out of the spaceplane, broke off large chunks of energy ores with its claws and tossed them to the transport robots. This is all money. It can be exchanged for tons and tons of cat food. The soldiers of the Freedom Army were very curious about this cat that did not need to wear protective clothing and could run nimbly in such a harsh environment with its round body. However, no matter how curious they were, they could not lose to this cat. The Freedom Army soldiers moved even faster when they saw the cat doing its best to break off the ores. Suddenly, the gray cat's claws froze in the middle of plucking the energy ores. It looked towards the sky. Sillin, they're here. Meow my ass. Carrie, knock them down one by one. The first thought that came to the Freedom Army people's minds when they saw the gray cat standing on top of the mine with its paw raised high like it was pointing at the world. So this is the cat that was eavesdropping at the time. Their second thought, this cat can talk. Their third thought, who's here? It didn't take long for them to realize that it was the other Sector V forces. Prepare for battle. Some of the Freedom Army soldiers stayed behind to continue mining, while the rest prepared for battle. Piloting a fighter in the sky, Carrie's face twitched again and again when he heard Hui Mao's roar. This cat is getting more and more arrogant. The 11th Squad starship was in stealth mode and some distance away from the newcomers. That was why they didn't notice that there was a starship parked outside the planet. Just like the Freedom Army, the 11th Squad was made up of spaceplanes, and they were annoyed that someone had arrived before them. That was why they started attacking before they even landed, because they all wanted to take everything for themselves. Large craters were blasted on the ground by the artillery fire. Rock fragments were sent flying everywhere, mixed with some fragments of energy ores. Carrie and the others who had been hovering in the sky started firing as well. Their bodies flashed past them. The enemy was almost unable to lock onto their target because they were hit by a blast before they could even lock onto their target. Carrie and the others might look like a mess, but they all had a plan and worked well together. Inside the spaceplane, Sillin could hear Carrie and the others' jokes and curses through the communicator. Artillery fire interweaved in the sky, densely packed like fireworks. However, fireworks wouldn't cause so many broken parts to fall because of being hit. Some were from the Freedom Army, and some were from the newcomers. While the Freedom Army was busy fighting in the sky, Hui Mao didn't stop mining. He ignored the fighters in the sky and busied himself with the digging robots. A couple of fighters were about to attack him when they saw his mining activity, but they were attacked by the phantom-like fighters before they could do anything. Hui Mao was fearless because he had Carry and the others' cover. Of course, Hui Mao wouldn't be afraid even without Carry and the others' cover. The cannonballs couldn't hurt it for now anyway. More people are coming, Cheto said. Another group of people was flying towards them from the sky. However, they didn't charge at them immediately. Instead, they waited outside for a while. It looked like they wanted to wait until the two sides fought each other to the death before attacking. Unfortunately, the reality didn't allow them to do so. This time, it wasn't just one side. The other side had arrived as well, and more people were coming one after another. Everyone knew about the same time, and the time to prepare was almost the same. If the Freedom Army hadn't changed their flight path at Silin's suggestion, they would have arrived at the same time as these people. The chaotic battle had begun. The normally dead planet was now covered in flames and debris. The battle in the sky was fierce, but because everyone was staring at the energy ores on the ground, their ground forces quickly landed and began fighting for resources. "Let's go!" Silin called out to the people inside the spaceplane and walked out of the hatch. Chapter 379. Silin and the others didn't join the melee. Instead, they stood guard around the area Moon had pointed out and cleared out anyone who entered the area. Tang Qiuqiu's efficiency had increased a lot since she gained the Purgatory Thunder Snake. Coupled with Tang Qiuqiu's strong mental fortitude, she was able to blow up a dozen or so people's heads in the blink of an eye without batting an eyelid. The people who came over were all wearing protective suits. It slowed down their movements quite a bit, and before they could even aim at Tang Qiuqiu, they had already lost consciousness. While pulling the trigger, Ichenthus took the opportunity to glance at Silin's direction. What he saw immediately filled him with envy, jealousy, and hatred. The Freedom Army and the newcomers were wearing similar protective suits. At first, he didn't think much of it since they were all wearing the same type of protective suits. But now that he saw the 11th squad, he couldn't help but feel sorry for himself. Even someone with the best genes and physique couldn't avoid some restrictions when wearing protective suits. However, Silin and the others were clearly wearing something different. Not only did he block the stray bullets, he didn't restrict the newcomers' movements at all. Looking at the little girl jumping up and down, then looking at the big fat bear wearing armor beside the little girl, and then looking at what they and the others were wearing, they felt really ashamed. It was one thing for their fighters to be outdated, but even their protective suits were outdated. No, they should be called armors. It would be a lie to say that they weren't jealous. Ichenthus, Qing and the others couldn't help but think that if the Freedom Army had this kind of equipment. Silin cleared out the newcomers, and every time he fired a shot, a couple of people would die. Right now, he was using a Purgatory Thunder Snake K instead of an S. K was more than enough to deal with these people. Hui Mao ignored the chaotic battle and continued to mine its energy ores. Boom boom. Fighter jets kept crashing, and some space planes had blown up and fallen to the ground. Some people didn't manage to dodge in time and were smashed into meat paste or caught in the explosion. Not only did they have to pay attention to the falling objects, but they also had to avoid the shots of fighter jets and the attacks of various people. Almost everyone on the ground was in a state of high tension, and for the people of Sector V, this tension was not fear, but excitement. The flames of war, the sounds of explosions, and the spurting of blood caused them to tremble with excitement. Silin clearly sensed that those who had been cleaned up did not fear death on the battlefield at all before they died. Once they were immersed in such a hail of bullets and bombardment, they would enter a different state. They were just like the men of sacrifice trained by many families and forces. In their current state, even if White Knight came out, these people wouldn't be able to suppress their fear at all. People had always avoided the people of Sector V. It was because people who grew up in the war-torn zones of Sector V were numb to many things. Right now, these people no longer cared about the top-grade energy ores that even outsiders would go crazy over. There was only killing and venting in their hearts. When faced with Silin's muzzle, they didn't even try to dodge. When he first joined Vanguard, Someone once told Sillin that there was not much of a sense of accomplishment even if you managed to kill all of the madmen of Sector V in the end. In fact, you might even feel like you had just killed a moving log. While Sillin was cleaning up the people who had entered the area, Shikai's voice came from the communicator. "Do you need me to send a robot to help you?" Sillin looked around and above him and said, "Not yet. How much longer do you need?" 5 minutes, no, 3 minutes. Rough or precise? Precise. All right. 3 minutes should be enough. He had just ended the call with Shikai when a Yu's voice came from the communicator again. "Sillin, White Knight said that someone had been here before us. However, they stayed on the other side of the planet and were not discovered by the detectors under the cover of the planet's magnetic field." "Someone else? Do you know who they are?" Sillin said while firing at the people who stepped into the area. "Not exactly humans. Most of them are robots." "The Robert family?" "I think so." "Alright, I got it. How are things on your side?" "I'm communicating with White Knight right now. I'm also arranging the settings here so that White Knight can leave this place." "You seem to be pretty busy." Sillin could hear the sound of a device being touched from the other end of the communicator. "You guys continue. I'll take care of things outside." "All right." Sillin was very puzzled when he learned about this planet. Green said that the people of Sector V had discovered it by chance, and although this explanation was plausible, Sillin was still skeptical. The chances of the people of Sector V coming here and leaving alive without knowing the environment and conditions of this planet were very small. It wasn't that Sillin looked down on the people of Sector V, but they saw things from a different perspective. Moreover, the colonists here were too busy taking refuge after the League of Stars had descended into chaos to pay attention to this unknown area. At a time when the forces of Sector V were busy fighting for territory, who would come to this place and discover this planet unknowingly? Or rather, who was the one who discovered this planet first and revealed it to them? From the looks of it, it was the Robert family. No wonder the Robert family had been quiet all this time. They had their eyes on this place since a long time ago. However, they didn't just want the energy ores on this planet, they also wanted to use this bait to eliminate the elites and leaders of the few influential forces in Sector V. This way, not only would they be able to obtain these top-quality energy ores, they would also be able to clean up Sector V and provide benefits to a certain army corps behind Robert. 2 birds with 1 stone. "Carrie, come back to me in 1 minute. At the same time, clean up the area I've marked out." Sillin informed Carrie and the others about the new operation plan. Then, he contacted Alkenthis and explained the new arrangements. He called back Chiefing, who had already run far away, and had the rest of the team get ready. By the time Sillin's countdown reached 15, the team members were already at the location Sillin had ordered. The fighters in the air had lowered their altitude and were flying around Sillin. Sillin gestured towards Achenthis. Achenthis nodded, indicating that he was ready as well. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. A beam of light rose into the sky and unfurled like an umbrella, enveloping the area Sillin had marked out. An energy shield. How did they get such a big energy shield? It took a lot of energy to support an energy shield like this, but they were in a mining area, and a top-quality energy ore was just around the corner. All they needed to do was set up a little. Shi Kai and Shi Mu had already begun setting up the energy shield when they arrived at the mining area, and they were very satisfied with its performance. In other words, they were very satisfied with the top-quality energy ores here. The shield's resistance coefficient was pretty good. The energy shield's appearance had lightened everyone's workload. All they needed to do was clear out the enemies within the energy shield's range, and the enemies outside the energy shield wouldn't be able to break in for the time being. Alkenthis stared at the chaotic battle outside the energy shield, and then at Sillin and the others. He suddenly realized that it was skill and talent that determined how far a team could go. It wasn't how many people were unafraid of death or how many good genes they possessed. The Freedom Army had been a rank lower than Sillin's 11th squad ever since they ran into each other. Aiken thus understood this very well, and the Freedom Army needed technical support if they wanted to continue to grow and rise. In an almost isolated environment like Sector V, The Food King's support alone allowed the Freedom Army to grow much faster than the other rising forces at the same time. What if they obtained other technologies as well? While Alkenthus was lost in thought, Inderson elbowed him and pointed his chin in a certain direction. Alkenthus looked in that direction and saw Cheto, who wasn't wearing any protective gear, pulling a large piece of energy ore out of the ground with his bare hands. Alkenthus and the others had never seen through Cheto before. Sillin was the 11th Squad's commander after all, and even if he didn't have detailed information on him, he was at least able to find out something about him. But Cheto, on the other hand, didn't have any information on him at all. Or rather, none of it was real. In fact, they didn't even know if he was human or not. He couldn't be human without protective gear in such an environment, could he? The people outside the energy shield attacked it angrily, but they couldn't break through it in a short time. Moreover, there were a lot of energy ores inside the energy shield, so there was no way the energy shield would run out of energy and retreat. That was why the fighting outside grew fiercer and fiercer in order to vent their frustrations. At first, there were fewer and fewer people outside the energy shield. When the leaders finally got their subordinates under control and decided to stop fighting, beams of high-energy beams shot straight at them and swept away the people in the air like brooms. The fighters and spaceplanes let out deafening explosions, and some whose wings were cut off fell straight to the ground. But before they could hit the ground, another beam swept over them and cut them into pieces. "They're here." Sillin looked at the direction of the beams and saw a group of robots flying towards them from the dark sky. "Is that the so-called Robert family's mechanical army?" Shikai asked. "That's them." After the rebellion, the Robert family's robots had upgraded very quickly. It was a testament to their title as the Mech Empire. The people outside the energy shield were quickly cleaned up, and the ground was covered in a thick layer of wreckage. As for the people who were originally on the ground, they were suddenly killed by the robots with sharp metal cutting wheels that appeared out of nowhere. Blood was flung out along with the rotation of the metal piece, spraying on the wreckage that was still emitting fire and black smoke, making a sizzling sound. No matter how numb the people of Sector V were, they had no choice but to retreat in defeat against these cold robots. More and more robots appeared on the ground, and more surrounded the energy shield in the air. Some of the robots still looked human, but the strangely shaped weapons they were wielding showed that they were different. After the robots had surrounded the energy shield, a space plane flew over. The communicator in Achenthus's hand rang. It was a call request. After pressing the call button, Achenthus placed the communicator next to him so that everyone could see the other person's image. When the call was connected, a person's figure appeared on the screen. However, it wasn't the Robert friend Sillin knew, but someone else from the Robert family who looked a little similar to friends. The person didn't seem to be looking at the communicator. Instead, he was staring at the enormous energy shield. "TSK, you guys sure surprise me." Achenthus didn't answer. They knew who the other person was now. Only the Robert family could possess such a mechanical army. "But I'm sorry, but don't think that you're safe hiding inside the energy shield. I may not have brought many mechanical soldiers with me this time, but it's enough to take out all of you. As for this energy shield, it's nothing." As the man's voice faded, the energy barrier above began to flicker. Soon, the energy barrier began to thin. "The energy shield has been affected," Carrie and the others exclaimed. At the same time, they were ready to charge out at any moment. However, after the energy shield had gradually faded, it brightened up again and returned to its original state. Shikai controlled the device in his hand and sneered at the figure displayed on the communicator. "Nothing." The person on the screen looked a little flustered, his face red and white. In the end, he waved his hand and said, "You may have some ability, but how long can you last against my mechanical army? I'll show you how your defenses crumble step by step, and how you'll be destroyed." As soon as that person finished speaking, another voice rang out. "You want to destroy where?" A white figure appeared next to the image, standing face to face with the person on the screen. "Guardian, we meet again." The person on the screen frowned when he saw Byakuya appear. Obviously, he didn't expect Byakuya to appear at this time. There was such a fierce battle here, So why didn't he appear? Byakuya didn't respond to this kind of nonsense like, "We meet again." Instead, he stared straight at the person on the screen. Under the gaze of this pair of white pupils, the person couldn't help but look away. "Although we avoided you before, it doesn't mean that we're afraid of you. You're just a failed product that hasn't taken shape yet." "Is that so?" The white figure in front of the communicator faded away, but the next moment, in the aircraft outside the energy shield, a white figure appeared on the screen in front of the person on the screen. Then the same figure appeared on the screen next to it, and then the third screen, the fourth screen. "What's going on?" Sillin looked at Moon, who was flying over. Moon spread his hands. "I just completely released Byakuya from here." Chapter 380. The white spirit lived up to the name of Ghost. Although she had no physical body and could only appear as a projection, she was very free inside the electronic systems. In a way, she was more like a virus to the Robert family people on the spaceplane. The Robert family could build robots this well, so they should be very good at system maintenance as well. But in the blink of an eye, the dozen or so light screens in the control room were filled with the white figure. Robert Borat, the man who spoke earlier, was so angry that he was shaking all over. When he came up with this plan, he didn't think that the guardian ghost of this place would be so difficult to deal with. He also didn't think that there would be someone in this group who could resist the interference and keep the energy shield stable all the time. How in the world did the trash of Sector V possess such technology? Borat clenched his fists tightly. No matter what, since he had taken charge of this plan, he had to complete it at all costs. This way, he would have more say when he returned to the Robert family. In terms of research, Borat couldn't compare to Friends. This was why his voice in the Robert family had always been weaker than Friends's. However, after working with the military, Borat relied on Beaver and Friends's diplomatic skills to obtain the support of the 8th Legion and some people in the Robert family. That was how he obtained the right to carry out a few operations. The first few operations were executed very well, and Borat was the one who discovered this place by accident. Borat's first thought wasn't to dig out the top-grade energy ores. Although the quality of the energy ores the Robert family had in reserve couldn't compare to these top-grade energy ores, they had the advantage in quantity. To Borat, the energy ores here were far less attractive than his plan. Just as Sillin and the others thought, Borat was the mastermind behind all this. He was planning to use this opportunity to eradicate some of the powerful forces in Sector V in one fell swoop, and this achievement was enough for him to receive even greater support from the Robert family and the 8th Legion when he returned. In fact, he even thought that if he completed his plan well, he might even surpass Friends and the others and become the new leader of the Robert family after the situation had stabilized. However, even though the ideal was good, reality caught Borat off guard. He didn't expect that the Freedom Army would join forces with Sillin and the others to come over. Just like many members of the Robert family, Borat was a typical stubborn and conceited person. He was overly confident and believed in the abilities of this mechanical army. Borat didn't analyze the 11th Squad and what happened before. In Borat's eyes, only this Spectre could be considered an opponent. Borat got his subordinates to try and intercept the 10 or so screens in the control room that had been taken over, but he realized that it was impossible. The other party had already entered the room, and many of the programs in the system had already been modified and messed up on a large scale. Even if they tried to deal with it, the light screens only flashed twice, and they were unable to erase the white figure. "Open the secret room," Borat said to his subordinates. The secret room was an encrypted area developed by the Robert family. It was like a secret room in the network. Nothing from the outside could enter it. Normally, the secret room would not be opened, and the controllers would be exposed outside. However, once the secret room was opened, the controllers would be isolated from the external system. The opening of the secret room could increase security, but at the same time, it also increased limitations. Many functions on the aircraft would be forced to stop. However, Borat didn't care. It was fine as long as they could defend against this Spectre. Sillin observed the situation from the ground. Although he didn't know what was happening inside the aircraft, he could see the dense mechanical language. Through this mechanical language, Sillin knew that there was definitely a silent struggle going on inside. On the Freedom Army side, Echenthis looked at the sky and then at Sillin's side. He suddenly felt somewhat powerless. At the same time, he was also glad that he called Sillin and the others. Otherwise, if they encountered this mechanical army, the people he brought would be far from enough to be slaughtered by the robots. Putting aside the difference in technology, the robot's combat strength was several times higher than his side's. Just looking at the corpses and mechanical wreckage outside the energy shield, it was obvious what would happen if they clashed head-on. What could they do against such an army? Hide inside the energy shield? Just as Echenthis was thinking, Sillin looked in a direction. The next moment, a white figure appeared there. The blue bar on Moon's face flashed. "Whitey, what's going on over there?" Whitey, although they had some thoughts about this name, they didn't say anything. What a joke. Facing this thing that was like a specter, who would want to provoke it? The white spirit didn't look at Moon. Instead, it stared at the aircraft in the sky and said, "They have isolation measures." "Then what do we do now?" Carrie looked at the robots outside and asked Sillin. If they went out like this, they would definitely not have an easy time. Those robots weren't the slow ones from before. They could clean up everything in the air in such a short time. If they went out, it would be a tragedy. Before Sillin could answer, Borat's voice came from the loudspeaker on the aircraft in the sky. "You guys like to hide inside, right? Very well, I'll let you personally experience the Robert family's mechanical army. Feel what the apocalypse is." Following Borat's order, the robots in the sky and on the ground started attacking the energy shield. Although they were able to withstand the bullets and cannons, the shock waves caused by the intense attacks made the people inside feel dizzy. This was especially true for the Freedom Army. They did not have the protection of the 11th Squad. The protective suits they wore could only withstand the harsh environment of the planet, not the shock waves from the shock waves. The Freedom Army couldn't hold it in anymore. They shouted that they wanted to go out and fight the metal creatures outside. They would rather go all out than endure this kind of torture inside. Echenthis looked at Sillin and asked for his opinion. After all, Sillin and the others had control of the energy shield. If Sillin and the others didn't agree, there was nothing Echenthis could do unless they fought. However, he didn't want to break the alliance that they had worked so hard to form. Let them endure it for a while. "Half a minute at most," Sillin said. Sillin had Shikai and Shimu take over the controls. He also had Carrie and the others land the fighter. The people of the Freedom Army were getting more and more irritable. Because of the vibrations of the energy field, there were a lot of charged particles in the air inside the energy shield. The charged particles made them feel uncomfortable, like thousands of needles were poking at their bodies. Their bad temper was triggered. If it wasn't for Echenthis suppressing them, they would have already started fighting. In this half a minute, Sillin and the 11th Squad started reorganizing their equipment. The weapons used to deal with the robots were different from the ones used to deal with humans. The bullets used were also different. Clad in armor, Carrie and the others walked out of the fighter. Out of habit, Carrie installed a shoulder cannon on his shoulder and buckled the foldable wrist blade on his arm. Then he assembled his gun and stretched his limbs while holding it. When Echenthis counted to the 23rd second, a high-energy beam appeared in the sky. The target wasn't the energy shield they were in, but the robots outside. They weren't just coming from the sky. They were coming from every direction. Originally, it shouldn't have taken this long for the robots to arrive from the starship. However, Shikai had to spend a little more time to make a better setup. The Freedom Army was a little stunned. Not long ago, they saw a robot army slaughtering a couple of Sector V's other forces core. Now, a similar beam was pointing at the robot army outside the energy shield. Who is it? Inside the space plane, Borat looked very bad. The space plane he was in had been hit a few times, and he nearly fell to the ground just now. It was only after he had his men activate the energy shield that he recovered a little. However, it was only a little. Since the secret room was open, part of the detector's functions were disabled. It was why they didn't notice the incoming enemies at first notice. "Are those robots?" Borat's subordinates exclaimed in surprise. The distant robots were growing closer and closer. Their silvery white bodies glowed coldly in the dark sky. Yes, everyone who saw them knew that they were robots. Moreover, the appearance of these robots was similar to the mechanical army that Borat was currently controlling. Some were in the shape of birds, some were in the shape of humans, and some were in the shape of other animals. What? Is there anyone else in the League of Stars other than the Robert family who possesses such a mechanical army? Inrelson asked next to Aiken thus. Blue looked at Silen's direction and said softly, "This is why they are so mysterious." The robots on both sides grew closer and closer. The robots that were attacking the energy shield turned their muzzles towards the newcomers. Although the outside didn't look much different, Borat quickly discovered that the new batch of robots were very adaptable. They were more like well-trained soldiers who knew how to line up, cover, and cooperate better. For example, when the robots on his side were concentrating their firepower, a large robot would appear and activate a beam shield. At the same time, the smaller robots around them would swiftly hide behind the beam shield and the large robot. Then, almost at the same time, the robots that were hiding behind the large robot would swiftly change directions and launch a crazy counterattack right after the first round of gunfire. Such a thing was easy to say, but if combined with the flying speed of those robots, it would be very difficult. Although the robots' programmed commands allowed them to do this, Borat still felt that there was something wrong with these newcomers. He couldn't tell why, but he felt a little annoyed. While Borat was annoyed, under the watchful eyes of everyone inside the energy shield, the two sides collided. Borat had always felt that his mechanical army was the best in the League of Stars. The amount of money that the Robert family had spent on them was enough to make any of the top families in the League of Stars turn their heads. Even the 8th Army had invested a lot of money into this army. However, all of Borat's pride was shaken by this brief collision. A batch of robots was sent flying. Although some stabilized themselves after being knocked back, the large dents on their bodies showed that they had failed. Looking at the other side, even if there were dents, they weren't to a frightening degree. Moreover, they recovered in an extremely short period of time. Although they were both made of memory alloy, there was a clear difference in the speed at which they rebounded. This wasn't just a problem with the material. It also involved other aspects. Even though Borat wasn't very accomplished in research, he still had some knowledge about robots. From this brief collision, Borat saw too many things. When a mechanical beast from the Shi family that looked like an eagle collided with another mechanical beast, it didn't separate from its opponent. Instead, at the moment of contact, it suddenly transformed from an eagle into a python and tightly coiled around the mechanical beast. Many serrated teeth appeared on the python's body, and the teeth carried high-energy lasers. Then, as it coiled around the mechanical beast, it cut the trapped prey into several pieces. All of this happened in the blink of an eye. There were many situations similar to this eagle mechanical beast. They could choose the best method and form based on the opponent they encountered and then kill their prey. The few small mechanical beasts on the ground also used a similar method to resist. When faced with a large opponent, they quickly gathered together and fused into a large body that was even larger than the opponent. Silen saw the newly assembled big guy that looked like a diamond waving its huge fist and twisting a robot in front of it into two. Then, it nimbly turned around and hammered the guy that was preparing to sneak up on it. The sneak attacker's head was directly smashed by the diamond hammer. Bang! Following the shot of a cannonball, a big hole appeared in the chest of the big mechanical King Kong. However, it didn't collapse. Instead, it split into a few small mechanical beasts and continued their hunting mission. What is that? Some of the Freedom Army members were stunned. Inside the energy shield, Shikai put away the microcontroller in his hand. It's not perfected yet. I can only use rough embryos to fight first. Shikai's tone was regretful, but the corners of his mouth couldn't help but curl up to show his pride. Look, even rough embryos are enough to deal with these trash. After observing the situation for a while, Silen signaled Shimu. Let's move on to the next step. A while later, several large energy shields appeared around the area where Silen and the others were located. These shields protected the energy ores so that they wouldn't be usable if they were destroyed. Now that they had released White Knight, There was no need for Sillin to stay in this area any longer. He signaled to the 11th squad, and they immediately got ready to work as a team. They had done this many times already, and the newcomers like Mogaz and the others had gotten used to it pretty well. After notifying Alkenthis, Shikai closed the large energy barrier outside. With Shikai's robots keeping the Robert family's mechanical army busy, the 11th squad didn't encounter too many of them. Carrie cheered and rushed out. They were actually quite familiar with dealing with robots. Sometimes, when Shusag wasn't fighting them, Shikai would send his robots to spar with him. That was why the 11th squad didn't need to get into battle mode as soon as they entered the battlefield. However, as he slashed and slashed, Carrie saw a monkey-like robot not far away jump sideways and dodge the opponent's shot. When it twisted in the air, it swung its arm and twisted the opponent's neck. Then, using the force of the rotation, it swung its arm again and accelerated when it landed. After drawing an arc, it smashed its opponent hard into the ground. Both Carrie and Shusag's faces twitched at the sight. Why does this feel so familiar? It seemed like they had fought like this not long ago in the training room of the starship. However, it was Carrie who was flung out of the training room. This time, it was the Robert family robot who was pinched by the neck and smashed into the ground. This planet's geological structure was quite hard, so a human wouldn't be able to create such a spectacular scene even if all the bones in their body were broken. Still unsatisfied, Shikai's monkey-shaped robot added 2 more kicks. If it wasn't for another Robert family robot, Carrie had a feeling that the monkey-shaped robot would have used its laser blade to finish off the robot. Carrie didn't know what happened to the robot that got slammed into the ground by the neck, but it didn't get up for a long time. The only thing it could see was the occasional sparks of electricity, which showed how hard it had been. Hui Mao didn't want to get involved in this battle. The only thing it cared about was the energy ores. It didn't care how many robots it killed. However, after a small energy ore pile next to it that was not protected by the protective shield was blown up, Lord Cat's hair stood on end. Meow. I'm not going crazy. Do you think I'm just here to act cute? Everyone witnessed the scene of a fat, round cat turning into a mighty mechanical beast in the blink of an eye. Then, the big cat in a berserk state spread its wings and flew into the air. It opened its mouth and roared. This roar made the people who heard it feel a sharp pain in their eardrums. Even the helmets of the protective suits couldn't stop it. Hui Mao's roar wasn't just sound waves. The robots in a large area around Hui Mao, whether they were from the Robert family or the new batch of robots made by Shikai, all showed signs of slowing down. However, Shikai's new robots were much slower than the Robert family's robots. It was this small difference that caused the Robert family's robots to suffer a tragedy. After slapping a few robots away with its wings, Hui Mao officially began to vent. In terms of speed, not even Shikai's new robots were a match for Hui Mao. Moreover, although the cat wasn't usually very reliable, its brain reacted very quickly during critical moments. Ever since it joined the fray, it had barely been hit once. At most, it was grazed by bullets. The sight of the gray cat's claw caused Inrainison to shudder again and again. It was because that claw, just a single claw, had hollowed out half the waist of the big guy who had beaten them into such a sorry state. Inside a space plane, Mo Heng poked Shikai, who was watching the battle outside, and asked, "When are you going to build a mech or a mech beast like Sillin's pet?" Shikai curled his lips, but he didn't say anything. His complacent expression had vanished completely. There was no good or bad without comparison. Compared to the Robert family's robots, Shikai's new robots were undoubtedly superior. However, it was only after Hui Mao's appearance that Shikai's attention shifted from Hui Mao to Cheto. Alright, there was also Cheto. Unlike Hui Mao's high profile, Cheto had always been like a shadow. His presence was very low, but he had done far too many amazing things when no one was paying attention to him. Cheto looked like an oddball among the armored and protective suits. He was an oddball that people couldn't help but gasp in amazement. He didn't use a blade. He only used his own hands. He didn't have wings, but his speed wasn't any slower than the robots in the sky. He didn't use any eye-catching energy beams, but too many robots had fallen to the ground wherever he went. When would they be able to build a robot like this? When would a robot army with every robot of this level be built? There was still a long way to go. Mo Heng scratched his white hair and let out a hoarse chuckle when he saw that Shikai's mood had gone from high to heavy. Then, he sat back down and continued watching the battle on the monitor. He was getting old, and he would only be able to observe the battlefield from a similar space in the future. However, this didn't mean that he had left the battlefield. He had created fighter aircrafts for Carey and the 11th Squad, and he had created improved weapons for them as well. He could empathize with the children who were fighting on the battlefield with such equipment. His heart was no longer young, but his blood still boiled as easily as before. Sillin cut down the robots one by one with his long, thin blade while swallowing his opponents one by one like the king of snakes in a hunting ground. The robots hit by the Hell Thunder Snake S would explode one after another, and the trio who had been paying attention to Sillin noticed it as well. A couple of robots around Sillin had been killed before they could even get close to him, and most of them weren't aiming at Sillin at all. Achenthus recalled the incident on the passenger starship. If a conflict had broken out back then, the three of them would have been the ones to die. Forget Cheto, Sillin alone was enough to send all three of them to hell. Moreover, Achenthus was sure that the strange gray cat was on the starship at the time. He was glad that he hadn't made an enemy out of a person like that. Their team was only made up of a handful of people, but they always managed to surprise him. Our cooperation must continue. This was the firm resolution Achenthus had made after this experience. Unlike Achenthus, Qing's attention was drawn to Sillin's blade. Other people might not know the origin of the blade, but Qing did. Her foster father used to be a big shot of Sector V, but he was assassinated later on. From her adoptive father's notebook, she learned about the star hunter Osculos, as well as Osculos's slender blade. Indigo was a little suspicious when she saw Sillin take out the blade, but as Sillin cut down the robots one by one, she realized that the blade was a piece of cake for her and the others, even though their expensive blades weren't able to do it easily. That's right, it must be that blade. Osculos was killed by someone. The news was spreading throughout Sector V, but no one could come to a conclusion as to who killed Osculos. Some said it was another star rank hunter, and some said it was a heavenly mandate soldier from the military. It was because no one could imagine that someone at their level could be killed by someone else. But now, Osculos's blade was in Sillin's hands. How could Qing not be shocked? Who the hell is Sillin? Other than Shikai's mechanical army, the 11th Squad and the Freedom Army, spikes, clamps and other traps would pop out of the ground from time to time. They were all controlled by White Knight. A lot of people had come here before, and all of them had perished in this area. Not even their bones were left behind. Right now, their opponents were robots. Even if these traps weren't as effective as they could be, they were still a great help. On the battlefield, the situation began to tilt. Borat almost pulled out his meticulously groomed hair, but it was useless even if he scratched himself bald. His subordinates had already made arrangements to escape. Borat's eyes were bloodshot as he stared at the scenes displayed on the screen. He slapped away his subordinate who came over to persuade him and muttered incoherently. The subordinate who had been slapped until his mouth was bleeding did not care if he would be slapped again. Together with a few others, they dragged Borat away. Their main mission was to protect Borat. This was a mission given to them by the upper echelons of the race. If Borat died, all of them and their families would be buried with him. Half an hour later, a disc-shaped spaceship detached from Borat's mother spaceship. Borat was forcefully dragged inside by a few of his core subordinates. This small spaceship was obviously specially made. The robots outside fired at it, but in the blink of an eye, the spaceship disappeared. Damn it, he escaped. Hui Mao grabbed a robot that was blocking its way and swallowed it into its mouth as if venting its anger. It chewed hard a few times before spitting out a pile of metal debris. Seeing this, Shikai could not help but smack his forehead. Creating a mechanical beast like this was too damn difficult. Now that the master had escaped, the remaining soldiers were just cannon fodder. Hui Mao ignored the robots and rushed into the abandoned mother spaceship to search for valuables. Chapter 381. We held a huge grudge against the Robert family because the spaceplane had exploded before it could even get much out of it. If it was in the past, the energy ores on the aircraft could still be pried out. After all, they were worth some money. But now that there were so many top-grade energy ores on the ground, the ones on the aircraft couldn't catch the cat's attention. We let out a loud curse as it stared at the destroyed spaceplane in the sky. Then, it returned to the surface and continued its great mining business. It didn't even bother to look anyone in the eye, and they were smart enough not to provoke the cat. Only a few robots were left struggling. The frequency of falling objects had decreased a lot. Due to the different composition of the atmosphere, the debris didn't burn for long and the sky returned to its original state. Sillin looked at the debris on the ground and then at the robots that were still struggling. They weren't affected by the destruction of the aircraft. They were relatively independent, but they could always follow their master's orders. Aside from the fact that they didn't have their own thoughts, this kind of mechanical army was pretty good. It was just that they were unlucky to run into the Shi family and the Shi family's army. Shi Kai was the only one behind the Shi family army, but the genius Shi Mu was also on their side. If the Robert family couldn't win now, then it would only get worse in the future. Yu's secret would boost the Shi family's morale. Although you didn't say anything, Sillin had the same feeling. Some people from the Freedom Army had already started cleaning up the battlefield. Others continued mining. Now that the enemies were dealt with, they could go mining without worry. A person from the Freedom Army was holding a tool and was about to start digging at a relatively large pile of ore. But as soon as he got close, a pair of cat paws appeared on the pile of ore, followed by a seemingly harmless cat head. Hui Mao pressed its paws against the pile of ore and looked at the person carrying the tool. It bared its teeth at the person who was holding the tool. The person was stunned for a moment, then quickly turned around and ran away as if it was the plague. Seeing that the person was so tactful, Hui Mao didn't continue to press and continued to mine. The people from the Freedom Army looked at each other and curled their lips. Forget it, don't provoke that cat. Didn't you see how those metal men were turned into ashes? The Freedom Army attributed Hui Mao's behavior to an animal's sense of territory. In truth, everyone in the 11th squad knew that territory was bullshit. What awareness! To that bastard, these mines were nothing but piles of fish biscuits. Ichenthis discussed with Sillin for a while and divided the area. Sillin occupied the majority of the area. After dividing the area, mining would be faster and there would be no conflicts. The Freedom Army had no complaints right now, and the metal soldiers were still floating in the sky. If a fight broke out, then they would definitely be the ones to suffer. It was better to be obedient, and at least they could reap some benefits. The fact that Alkenthis had brought them here meant that their brains were a bit better than most of the lunatics at Sector V. Not only were they a bit better skilled, they were also smarter than most of the madmen at Sector V. The danger was over, and there were still metal soldiers standing guard in the air. Old Mo also wandered out to survey the terrain and the surrounding environment. Others were concerned about the mineral deposits, but Mo Hung was more concerned about how such a mineral deposit could form here. Although Mo Hung was not proficient in these things, he had studied similar projects for a period of time in the past. After investigating this place, Mo Hung had a guess. He felt that someone had used the environment and magnetic field here and used some technology to catalyze the formation of this mineral deposit. Mo Hung didn't know how, but he did know that there were traces of artificial modification. It was just that it was a long time ago, and it wasn't that obvious. When Mo Hung mentioned his doubt to Sillin, Sillin smiled and told him not to look into it. Old Mo sighed. As I thought, there are top geniuses in every era. It's just that some have been discovered and become famous overnight, and some have remained unknown until now. Sillin didn't explain the Shi family's matter to Mo Hung, and the old man pretended to be confused. Mo Hung had speculated a lot of things during his time with the 11th squad, but he didn't show it on his face. He pretended that he didn't know anything, and since Sillin told him not to look into it, Mo Hung pretended that he didn't notice anything. There were a lot of wounded, but the people of the 11th squad were fine. Chifeng's claw wound was a little more serious, but the others only suffered minor injuries. The 11th squad had also provided aid to the Free Army. If it weren't for them, the Free Army would have suffered more casualties. Aiken thus was very grateful for this. A lot of places on the planet, especially places with a lot of mineral deposits, had projectors installed underground. That was why White Knight could be seen in the form of a projection. For example, right now, White Knight, Moon, and Sigma were taking a walk side by side, but no one knew what they were talking about. It was a soundless conversation that most people couldn't hear. After a period of communication, Moon and White Knight walked into the spaceplane. We stopped watching them after seeing that the mines had been cordoned off and played with them. "Your White Knight." Hui Mao stood on a high shelf and looked down at the white projection below. It was growing more and more fond of the feeling of looking down at others from a high place. White Knight didn't answer. She simply looked at Hui Mao. After the chaotic battle earlier, she already knew what was different about the cat. Whis wagged its tail. "I know a guy called White Knight from the Mist Bodhisattva sect, but he's a man. His eyes are one black and one white, and he looks like an idiot. There's something in common between the two of you, and that is you both have facial paralysis." White Knight and Moon. Can't this cat speak a little more gracefully? Although White Knight didn't have much of an expression on her face, you knew that she still cared a lot about Whis' words. Moreover, her name was originally just one word, and that was white. It was only because of the minerals and the Olillo incident in the myth of creation that she was labeled as white. Actually, it's not that big of a deal. The League of Stars and Mist Bodhisattva are huge. There are plenty of people with the same name, Sigma hurriedly explained. White Spirit. What? Hui Mao cocked an ear to the side and looked at the white figure below. "I'll be called White Spirit from now on." "White Knight is the name of the energy mine," White Spirit said. Yu swung his arms and circled the White Spirit. "In any case, I'll just call you Whitey." Yu told Whis about the White Spirit. Now that the White Spirit was completely free, she no longer needed to guard the energy mine. The Shi family was supposed to stay together, wasn't it? That was why the White Spirit was supposed to stay with Sigma and Moon. Hui Mao slowly wagged his tail and stared at White Spirit for a while. "You don't look like a bad person. Fine, I'll let you join the team." When Carrie heard Hui Mao's words, he curled his lips and knocked Hui Mao on the head with a tool. Then he quickly put down the tool and slipped away. Hui Mao bared his teeth at Carrie's back, stretched out his claws, and pulled them back. "I'll deal with him later. I'll pry open all of Carrie's storage cabinets." No one knew what the White Spirit was thinking when she saw the scene. Even though to others she was just a virtual character created by a program, just like the original robot, the White Spirit had her own thoughts, and that was what amazed Shikai. Hui Mao bent his forelimbs and combed the hair on his head that was messed up by Carrie. Then he looked at White Spirit and asked, "Oh right, when did you become Cheto's girlfriend?" White Spirit. "Who the hell is Cheto?" The White Spirit looked at Moon, who was counting his fingers, and then at Sigma, who was looking left and right. "I want to know as well." Chapter 382. The edge of the mining area was littered with debris. The cleaning robots only cleaned up the debris within the mining area briefly. They didn't bother to clean up the mechanical debris or the smashed robots outside of the mining area. The Freedom Army only took care of their own casualties. They didn't bother to deal with the metal guys because they were all too busy right now. Right now, Cheto was standing quietly in the middle of the wreckage. He looked very bleak in this dim environment, or at least that was what Carrie thought. Carrie had just knocked Hui Mao with a tool and slipped out of the mining area. When he was circling around the perimeter, he saw Cheto standing among the wreckage, so he turned a corner and walked towards him. In Carrie's opinion, Cheto must have been touched by the scene. After all, Cheto was a robot. How could he not be emotional when he saw the wreckage in front of him? It was no different from a human seeing a field of corpses strewn all over the place. "Hey, brother. Feeling sad alone?" Carrie walked up to Cheto from behind and patted his shoulder. Cheto slowly turned around to look at Carrie. There wasn't any sadness on his face, and it definitely didn't look like he was sad. However, Carrie attributed it to a robot's habitual facial stiffness. Actually, there's no need to think too much about it. Hunters like us face things like this all the time. I was a little uncomfortable when I first saw a field of corpses and a sea of blood, but I'm a human too. Later on I got used to it. Some bastards deserve to die. Just think about how evil those robots were. While Carrie was talking, he saw Hui Mao and Sigma walking towards him from the corner of his eye. The white spirit's white figure was too eye-catching in this environment, so it was hard not to notice it. About that. Keep thinking about it. I still need to help out over there. Carrie said goodbye and slipped away. He didn't want that fat cat to take revenge on him. Hui Mao trotted over and jumped onto Cheto's shoulder. Then, it patted Cheto with its paw and said to the white spirit, "Here, this is Cheto." Cheto looked at Moon and the others before looking at the white spirit studying him. Finally, he turned to look at Hui Mao and asked, "What's wrong?" "It's nothing. Little Bai said that she doesn't know you, so I brought her here to meet you. She's your girlfriend after all." Wheeze licked its paws innocently and pretended not to notice Ayu gesturing at it. Cheto and the white spirit turned to look at Moon at the same time. Moon's head was still bowed, and his thumbs made of oval-shaped metal plates were circling each other. Suddenly, he let out an "ah" and said to Cheto, "What did Carrie say to you just now? Is there a secret?" What a great way to change the topic. Still, Cheto gave him face and answered, "It's nothing. Carrie thought I was being sentimental here, and he was just expressing his concern for his teammates." What's there to be sentimental about? Hui Mao tilted his head and looked at Cheto. Cheto shot him a helpless look and said, "I don't know. Maybe human hearts are a little fragile and emotional or something." Ayu scratched his round head and said, "Then why are you standing here? This place is full of trash." "I'm looking for some useful information," Cheto answered. "Information?" Yeah. While saying this, Cheto pointed at a robot that had been chopped in half, its torso caved in, and its head was severely deformed. Then, a disjointed image appeared in his eyes. The image was very blurry, but it was clear that there were two human figures in it. One of them was Robert Borat, and the other was flickering a lot because the image was very blurry. "This is their memories." Cheto's eyes returned to normal, and the image disappeared. "Doesn't that mean we can read the memories of these dead robots to find useful information?" Hui Mao asked. "Not every robot. We can't read the memories of robots that are completely dead and relatively conscious. However, we can read the memories of robots that are in between these two states. However, the memories of these robots are incomplete, and the degree of damage varies. It's up to luck to get useful information." Hui Mao, Yu, Sigma, and even the white spirit tried to read the memories of those who were in the dead and awake states. Most of them were in the dead state, and it wasn't easy for them to find a robot in the middle state. Unfortunately, it wasn't as smooth as Cheto's. "Meow. I'm giving up." Hui Mao clawed at a nearby robot that was in the dead state. He couldn't read Cheto's memories, and all he could see was a series of images that couldn't be seen at all. Although he was angry, he didn't stomp on the robot in the middle state that he had finally found. Instead, he vented his anger on the dead robot. Cheto walked over and read the memories of the robot Hui Mao had tossed aside. He didn't find anything special for now, so he decided to go back and organize the information he had gathered. He should be able to find something. If we can find more information, we'll be able to learn more of the Robert family's secrets. It'll make our operation a little easier, and it'll be good for us, said Hui Mao while scratching at a dead robot with his claws. A cat was a vengeful animal. It still remembered that it had failed to obtain any benefits from Robert Borat and that the fellow had slipped away. No, these memories can only be used as a reference. They might not be correct, said Cheto. Machines don't lie. Ayu didn't agree with Cheto's explanation. His master once told him that robots were very honest, and that their memories were as they were. Unlike humans, they wouldn't make up a lot of things that they didn't know how to make up. I agree, said Hui Mao. Cheto let out a sigh and nudged the robot next to him with his foot. Then, he sat down in front of Hui Mao and held out a hand. The image of a fish appeared on his palm. It was a fish Hui Mao had raised in a pond in Sigma's indoor garden. What is this? Asked Cheto. Fish, of course, replied Hui Mao. The image on Cheto's palm flashed, and a plate of dried fish appeared in front of him. It was the kind Hui Mao often ate. What about this? Dried fish. What about this? The image changed into a bag of fish biscuits. It was Hui Mao's favorite flavor. Fish biscuits. Hui Mao's eyes grew brighter and brighter. Then, the fish biscuits flashed again and turned into an all-fish meal. It was a food Hui Mao had always wanted but never had the chance to eat. Cheto asked, "What do you hate the most?" Hui Mao's mouth started watering the moment he saw the all-fish meal in Cheto's hand. His pupils dilated, and his voice grew louder and louder. Holy shit! Hui Mao's curved tail froze before he could finish his answer. His ears pulled back a little, and his beard shook a little. Then, he fell silent and lowered his head in deep thought. What do you hate the most? What do you hate the most? Moon, Sigma, and the White Spirit didn't say anything. If they were in Hui Mao's shoes, they might not have handled the situation better. Cheto closed his palm, and the image disappeared. They are real, but they might not be correct. If I had asked you this last question alone, or if I hadn't shown you this image, your answer might not be wrong. Cheto rubbed Hui Mao's head before he got up and went back to looking for other intermediate robots to read their memories. Not far away, Oldemo was resting on a rock. When he saw this scene, he patted Silin on the shoulder and pointed at Cheto, who was reading the robot's memories. How the hell did you build a guy like that? Silin rubbed his forehead. I doubt it even now. Cheto's learning ability was just too amazing. Moreover, he didn't just learn a lot from life and interpersonal relationships. More importantly, he loved to read books, and there was no limit to what kind of books he could read. Back then, he could read an ancient classic literature appreciation book that the affiliated school students couldn't even be bothered to touch, and he could discuss all kinds of entertainment and pastimes with the students for an entire night. In fact, he had even taught Wii's psychology before. Actually, Silin, the question I want to ask you the most is, will your cat grow into something even more troublesome? Cheto was a relatively rational person. This was because of his very nature, but Wii's nature was different. The so-called rationality of a machine couldn't even compare to a fish biscuit in its eyes. Silin didn't know that the cat's mind was different from that of a robot or an animal. The reason Cheto was able to read the memories of the Robert family robots was probably because Silin had used the Robert family's first-generation liquid core brain when he built Cheto. Although the liquid core brain inside Cheto's head was completely different from before, he still knew some of the Robert family's technology better than anyone else. 2 days later, the Freedom Army was more or less done with their business, and the 11th Squad was ready to return home. They had gained a lot from this trip, and it was all thanks to the 11th Squad. Without the 11th Squad, the number of people who would have made it back alive could be counted on one hand. The rest of the wreckage was dealt with by the Freedom Army as well. A lot of precious metals could be recovered from the wreckage, and it was also something the Freedom Army lacked. Of course, Silin wasn't going to fight them for it. The materials Shikai had brought back from Mist Bodhisattva and Silin himself were enough for the 11th Squad to use for a very long time. Thank you, everyone. I owe you another favor. I know I was the one who told you about this place, but I would have died without you. Thank you. Alkenthis said. You're welcome. It's a cooperation, everyone. I'll keep an eye on this planet for you. All right. Although most of the mineral deposits on this planet had been mined, there were still some that could be used as bait. Millions of years later, this kind of energy ores might appear on this planet again. After the Freedom Army left, Silin told everyone to get ready to depart. Moon and the others had dealt with the traces of the Shi family on the planet a long time ago, so they didn't need anyone else to do it. They also didn't need to worry that someone else might discover something about the Shi family. As for the secrets of the energy ores on this planet, Moon didn't need to tell Silin. Silin already knew that the Shi family had more than one planet as an experiment site. The undiscovered energy ores were probably kept for the Shi family's future use. Everyone returned to the starship parked outside the planet. This time, they had an Inhuman with them. There were many projectors on the starship, so they could see the White Spirit from many places. The Super AI Little 11 on the starship had also gained a new companion to communicate with. Silin sat in the break room and went through the information he had gathered during this trip. At the same time, he was thinking about the water bomb. How powerful would the water bomb be in an environment where there wasn't enough water? Silin had tried it on the planet with the energy ores before. The crystallization process was very slow, and the effect wasn't great. He couldn't unleash its full power at all. Moreover, the crystals weren't pure either. Once they were impure, the crystal's hardness would decrease, and they would shatter easily. What if it wasn't a water bomb, but something else? After calculating for a long time, Silin finally gave up. He couldn't think of a way to succeed just yet. Lying down on the chair, Silin took a deep breath and relaxed himself. Then, he turned around and saw Hui Mao sleeping so soundly beside the table that his neck was dangling over the edge of the table. He had no idea how he could sleep so soundly in such a position. Hui Mao had fallen silent for a while after Cheto had said those words to him, but it was only for a very short time. After that, Hui Mao had reverted to his old self and even pried open Carrie's locker. After stretching his limbs a bit, Silin walked out of the break room and went to discuss his future plans with Yudi. Silin immediately saw Cheto sitting there reading a book the moment he walked out of the door and turned a corner. This guy often sat there reading books, and because he wasn't disturbed by Snowball and the others playing around, very few people passed by this place. It was quiet and close to Cheto's own room. Suddenly, Cheto said, "Don't waste your energy. You can't infect me." The white spirit appeared next to him right after Cheto finished speaking. Cheto's gaze moved from the book in his hand to the white figure next to him. "You can't infect me as long as I don't agree to it." The white spirit stared at Cheto for a while before pointing at the book in his hand. "Why do you want to read these things? They can be firmly memorized through data transfer." "What I enjoy is the process, because I can learn a lot of things through this process, and in the process, I can feel that I'm not a rigid machine." The white spirit didn't quite understand Cheto's words. It was because Ayu had told her that they were advanced robots that were different from normal rigid robots. Therefore, she couldn't understand what Cheto was saying. Noticing the white spirit's confusion, Cheto flipped his palm and revealed a white interface. Let's take drawing as an example. If I want to draw a sea beast, the image of a sinister-looking sea beast appeared on the white interface. Its wide dorsal fin cut through the waves like a giant blade and rose straight into the sky. Is this a drawing? No, it's not. This is a direct reflection of the information in my head. I didn't draw it. While saying this, Cheto took out a pen and a drawing clip from his backpack beside the bench. He put down the book in his hand and placed the drawing clip on his knees. Then he flipped to a blank page and started drawing with the pen. The charcoal brush carried an ancient charm as it slowly drew a silhouette. Then the silhouette turned from blurry to exquisite, and the sea beast slowly took shape. The white spirit watched quietly from the side. She seemed to be starting to understand something. However, she was an incorporeal body, and she was used to conveying information through virtual projection. She couldn't walk and move freely like Cheto and Ayu. Her range of activity was always limited to a virtual world, and even her body was incorporeal. It was like a soul without a body. Do you want to give it a try? Cheto looked at the white spirit with a smile. How? It was still the same cold voice, but this time there was a hint of hope in it. Cheto raised the hand holding the pen. The hand that was originally identical to a human's gradually changed color until it was almost the same silver color as a crude robot's. The white spirit was stunned for a moment before she sat down next to Cheto. She reached out and touched the silver arm. Then the two arms overlapped. Cheto once said that no one could infect him without his permission. No virus or program could infect him. However, he had removed the seal on one of his arms and allowed the white spirit's hand to attach itself to it. It looked like the arms of two people had overlapped. The silver arm slowly turned back to the same color as a human's, and there was a white shadow on the arm. It looked like a pair of hands holding a white palm, and the two hands were holding a pen. Next to the completed sketch of the sea beast, a rather exaggerated but cute little drawing slowly appeared. It was a picture of blue skin swinging its tail while standing upright. Its mouth was wide open and spraying water. Standing at the corner, Silin smiled when he saw it. Just as he was about to leave, he felt a weight on his shoulder. Oh, Cheto is hitting on a girl. Cat's eyes widened. They're drawing blue skin? Why not me? Silin grabbed Fat Cat, who was about to go over and cause trouble, and walked to the other side of the passage. Meow, I'm going to tell Moon and the others. After Silin dragged him out of the passage, Hui Mao ran off to gossip with Moon and the others. The Miantuan hurriedly followed him and grabbed Cat's tail. Then, Hui Mao ran away with him. Oh, Silin, you came just in time. I was just about to notify you, said Yudi when he came out of the command room. Silin walked into the command room, and Yudi showed him the encrypted message he had just received. There was no actual content in the message. It was just a signal band, and the message was for Silin to contact them through it. Silin adjusted the parameters of the command room's communicator using the decoded signal band. Then, a human figure appeared on the light screen. I was wondering when you would be able to contact us. Long time no see. Silin frowned. He didn't think he had seen this person before, but Silin remembered the voice. What a surprise. Chapter 383. The man looked very ordinary. His clothes and appearance were ordinary, and he did not have the kind of aura that could be felt even through the communicator's screen. He looked like an ordinary middle-aged uncle in the middle of a crowd. That was all. However, this person was the person Silin had been searching for the answer to his doubts. Back when he was in the Grade 1 prison of Sector S, the semi-conscious Silin had heard this voice, and the voice had even hypnotized him. At the time, whenever Silin tried to recall the situation before he fainted, he would be affected by this voice and unable to calmly analyze what happened at the time. It was true that Silin had never seen this person in person, but Silin remembered this voice very clearly. Moreover, although this person did not rescue Silin back then, he did not kill Silin directly either. Wuxia incognito? Silin looked at the person on the screen. Yo, you know me. The uncle on the screen smiled, scooped a spoonful of ice cream into his mouth and smacked his lips. I remember your voice, and then I made some deductions based on what happened later. Silin answered. Although things didn't go too smoothly at Sector S back then, Silin did admire Wuxia Incognito quite a bit. Wuxia Incognito, the leader of the organization, Wuxia. He was also the assassin organization, Wuxia, that he led. Together with Mist, they were known as the two top assassin organizations in the entire League of Stars. Because they were so special, these two assassin organizations basically did not participate in other assassin organization rankings. The difference in strength and influence was too great, and these two organizations were like the glory and code of electronic media publications. They were lonely at the top. Why would a person who could directly go against Azrael seek him out now? Silin did not understand. The uncle who finished his ice cream touched the cream stuck to his beard and said, The first time we met was inside that prison of Sector S, right? The time you were beaten half to death by the Blue Phantom. Silin. How direct. The Blue Phantom, that Wuxia mentioned, should be the woman with the blue light blade. Beaten half to death? Yudi looked at Silin. He really didn't know that Silin had been beaten so badly. In fact, you were the one who caused me to be in such a miserable state, said Silin. At that time, he really couldn't beat the blue succubus, but if Silin's guess was right, the one who dealt the final blow was indeed this uncle who had just finished eating his ice cream and was wiping his mouth. The uncle on the screen was stunned. Didn't you get beaten up by the blue charm? I remember that I usually don't fight with people whose strength is too far apart. Silin and Yudi. At that time, Silin's strength was indeed a little lacking. However, to Yudi, Silin's strength at that time was very powerful even in the 6th division. The difference in strength was too great. This was really a blow to him. I also remember that I had already escaped, but I was pulled back the moment my feet touched the ground, Silin said slowly. Wuxia patted his head as if he was thinking hard. 5 seconds later, Uncle Ian waved his arm. Aya, my memory is bad because of my age. I don't remember. Silin and Yudi, then why are you sending us this message now? There are many people here who are much weaker than you, Silin said. That's not it. I just heard that you guys taught that kid from the Robert family a lesson. Oh, and I helped you silence him. Shouldn't you thank me? Borat was dead? Sillin and Yudi looked at each other. What they cared about was not whether Borat had been silenced, but how did Wuxia's people find out about what happened here, and how did they coincidentally encounter the escaping Borat? Did Wuxia already have his eyes on Borat and the others, or were they the ones who had their eyes on them? They had their eyes on Borat and used someone else to get rid of the main force, then waited outside to get rid of the fish that escaped the net. But if they had their eyes on the 11th squad from the start, after some thought, Sillin said, "You're really far-sighted." Uncle Ian chuckled and cupped his hands. "You flatter me. You've been watching us, haven't you?" Sillin said. Uncle Ian did not hide anything from him. "It's just that I couldn't find you, kid. I only saw your robot substitute a few times." It seemed that Wuxia came prepared and had done a detailed investigation on the 11th squad. "You haven't told me why you're looking for us. The 11th squad is just a small squad in Vanguard, and it's only been established recently. Like you said, the difference in strength between us is too great, so there shouldn't be much interaction." Difference in strength. Uncle Ian rubbed his chin. "If I remember correctly, a couple of my subordinates suffered at your hands before. For example, Rhapsody on a rainy night? During their rescue mission, Sillin and the others had run into members of Wuxia, namely Liquid Silver, Stora, and Judy. The trio had failed to gain any advantage over Cheto and Shusag, and Judy had suffered a setback as well. Back then, Liquid Silver and the others had gone to Miracle Corporation's base to complete their mission, and when they returned, they looked like a mess. Everyone in Merciless was very surprised because they had never seen them in such a sorry state before. Later on, after Liquid Silver and the other two explained the incident in detail to Uncle Ian, he managed to gather some information and put the blame on Sillin. Although Shusag had reverted to his original appearance during the investigation, Liquid Silver was still able to recognize him. He didn't look like the man they'd met at the base. The more they investigated the 11th squad, the more puzzled they became. Why did it feel like this squad was full of secrets? Why would the captain use a robot as a substitute? Wuxia hadn't run into Sillin or Cheto at all during their investigation. It was precisely because of this that Ian Wuxia was even more curious. The fact that they were able to beat Wuxia's men proved that they were capable people. He didn't think that a small squad of the Big Four would be able to infiltrate Miracle's base and mess with his subordinates. "Let's meet up. There are some things I need to tell you in person," Uncle Ian said with a sincere expression. "Are you going to jump out of nowhere if I say no?" Before Wuxia could answer, Sillin said, "Level 1 search." Wuxia still didn't understand what Sillin meant. A short while later, Judy walked over and pointed to the side with an embarrassed look on her face. Wuxia turned around and saw a line of words appearing on a screen in the command room. "I found you." After Sillin issued the Level 1 search order, Moon, Sigma, Cheto and the others would step in and help if the starship couldn't find the target. Sillin didn't believe that anyone could escape from their combined efforts. Sure enough, in less than 10 seconds, the spacecraft hidden in a large gas star-shaped group of satellites was dug out. "Heh, this is interesting. Piglet, you've been messed with twice already," Wuxia said to Judy next to him. Judy's face turned from green to red, and then from red to black. "Boss, can you call me something else?" "I can't." After that, Wuxia turned around and continued chatting with Sillin as if nothing had happened. At the same time, he gestured for his subordinates to fly the space plane over. The atmosphere in the 11th squad grew heavy when they learned that the target was Wuxia, one of the two great assassin organizations. Hui Mao, Shueqiu and the other gluttons were the only exceptions. Carrie's hands were shaking a little. It wasn't from fear, but excitement. "Wuxia. That's Wuxia. I can't believe I've been a hunter for so many years. I can't believe that I'm able to get this close to a Wuxia, and it's the legendary hidden Wuxia assassin." Carrie panted heavily, but he couldn't suppress his excitement. Unlike hunter regiments or assassin organizations, the Mist and Wuxia were too mysterious. Although they were notorious, Carrie was more interested in the Mist and Wuxia than Azrael. Xiao Shang was still a little worried. After all, He had heard of the name Wuxia a long time ago. When he first became a hunter, these two assassin organizations were nothing more than legends to new hunters like him. Even after these two organizations became more high-profile, he still didn't think about getting close to them. After all, these two assassin organizations had always set their sights high. They were people who could even assassinate politicians from the League of Stars and military bigwigs. Xiao Shang could only admire them. Aren't you guys worried? Ba Dao glanced at his companions and asked. Mogaz was just as excited as Carrie. In fact, he didn't look worried at all. Although some of the others were worried, they were all looking forward to it. What's there to be afraid of? How about I protect you guys? But I'll charge you a protection fee. Hui Mao spread his wings and flew around in a circle. Forget it. I haven't even settled the score with you for breaking into my locker yet, Carrie said while tidying up his equipment. All right, Shusik. Did you say that you ran into Wuxia's men head-on before? Carrie asked. Yeah. Cheto fought them too. What happened? I'm standing right here, aren't I? Shusag flicked the corner of his shirt. They're pretty strong, but there's no need to be afraid. I might not be able to defeat them, but Cheto can. If it weren't for Silin's communication, he probably would have taken out one of them already. Shusag's words caused the mouths of the players who were sorting out their equipment to fall into an O shape. So the real badass had always been around them, and he was keeping a low profile. Everyone was ready to fight, but Wuxia's space plane didn't get too close to Silin's group. Maybe it was out of habit or something else, but Wuxia's space plane stopped a certain distance away from them. Silin continued chatting with Wuxia through the screen. Let's have a match. If you win, I'll tell you something, Wuxia said. What kind of news? Silin asked. Vanguard, of course. Why would I waste my breath? Wuxia answered. Not far behind Wuxia, Liquid Silver and the others curled their lips at the same time. You're always full of nonsense, aren't you? How do you want to compete? Silin asked again. Wuxia looked outside the space plane and said, 2 people from each side. Space combat. Space combat? No, naked combat. Silin didn't know what to say. On Wuxia's side, Liquid Silver and the others face-bombed. In the end, it was Judy who corrected them. Boss, they don't understand what we're saying. Uncle Kane explained, it's a common saying in our organization. It means fighting in space without using a space plane, just using protective suits or something. After Wuxia's explanation, Silin asked, Location? Wuxia waved his hand, and an image popped up. It was the scene outside. The asteroid belt over there. It's close, and the venue is good. There's no electromagnetic storm. What a great opportunity. What if we lose? Yudi asked worriedly. He knew a lot about Wuxia, and it was precisely because he knew more than Carrie and the others that Yudi was more worried. Win or lose, there was one thing that couldn't be denied. They were relying on them. Lose? If you lose, then pay us some money. Give us some of the energy ores you just obtained. Not much. Just 20% of what you have will be enough, Wuxia said. Yudi looked at Silin. What do you think? We accept. But I still want to ask, is there only one match? Silin asked Wuxia. Just one match. More than that is a waste of time. Are you going to fight? Of course not. Why would I get involved in a child's game? A child's game? Yudi was helpless at this description, but the other party was Wuxia. As long as Wuxia didn't show up, it should be fine, right? Wuxia gave Silin and the others 10 minutes to prepare and decide who to send. Who's going? Emoheng asked. Old Emo was worried. They had finally ended a fight, but they had to face such an opponent before they could even return home. Old Emo knew a lot about Wuxia because of his son, so he had naturally heard of Wuxia. Being a hunter really wasn't easy. I'll go. Huh. Although he was mentally prepared, Emoheng still couldn't help but worry. There were plenty of capable fighters in the 11th squad, and they could join the fray as well. What if something happened to Silin himself? After all, the other party was Wuxia's man. At the end of the day, Old Emo was still selfish. He didn't want Silin to take the risk. It's fine. I know what I'm doing. You know what you're doing? That's what you say every time. Old Mo waved his hand and sat down helplessly. What about the other person? Yudi asked. Sillin looked out the door and shouted, Wheeze, go out and fight. All right, Hui Mao, who had been waiting outside, flapped its wings and flew in. It looked like it was in a good mood. Mo Heng didn't know what to say anymore. Hui Mao was a stubborn man. Once he made up his mind, he wouldn't be able to change his mind. As for this cat, well, forget it. 10 minutes later, the screen came back on. How is it? Have you decided? Wuxia asked. Yes, we can start at any time, Sillin said. All right, let's begin. As soon as Wuxia finished speaking, one of the spaceplane's doors opened and 2 people flew out. Sillin didn't know who the 2 people on Wuxia's side were. They were wearing protective armor, but unlike normal armor, it was probably made by Wuxia himself. It belonged to the space camouflage category, and there were many thrusters and acceleration devices installed on it. Although it wasn't as light as Shimu's armor, it wasn't too far off. From the looks of it, Wuxia's people often wore this kind of protective armor in space battles. Let's go. Sillin patted Hui Mao's shoulder and walked toward the hatch. Sillin's decision might seem hasty, but he had his own plans. Although he hadn't come into contact with Yin Wuxia much in the past, he had learned a lot about him. Shihua Jing and Lung had told him a lot of things about Yin Wuxia just now, and Mo Heng had told him some things about Yin Wuxia. Since Wuxia was waiting for them, it meant that he was prepared. He wasn't asking for his opinion, so he couldn't turn him down even if he wanted to. Sillin also told Yudi about his plans for all kinds of unexpected situations. He believed that with Yudi's capabilities, he wouldn't disappoint Sillin if something really did happen. Moreover, Cheto and the others were ready to take action as soon as Sillin gave the signal. Moreover, there was a squad of mechanical soldiers on the starship that could fight in space. Hui Mao transformed into his human form at the hatch's entrance. Every time he transformed into this form, he would feel a sense of pride and arrogance. Awe-inspiring, truly awe-inspiring. Flapping his wings, Hui Mao turned around and called out to Sillin, "Let's go." The hatch opened, and Sillin jumped onto Hui Mao's back and grabbed Hui Mao's ears. The man and the cat left the starship together. The venue was the asteroid belt not far away from them. Fat Cat flew over with Sillin and stopped on one of the asteroids. Then she looked at the 2 people standing on another small asteroid. Inside the command room on Wuxia's side, everyone was staring at the image on the big screen. It really is him and that cat, Judy said. Just now, they were discussing whether Cheto or that strange cat would be the one Cheto was going to fight. During their investigation of the 11th Squad, there was a video of the cat flying in space after its transformation. That was why they had made a bet on it. Wuxia had bet on Hui Mao's side, and Liquid Silver and the others had bet on Cheto's side. After all, they had seen how terrifying Cheto was. In the end, Cheto was the cat. To be honest, that cat is pretty impressive. Is it the legendary cyborg? Judy asked. That's right. Moreover, it's different from the failed products of those researchers. This cyborg life form is very stable. As Yin Wuxia spoke, he glanced at the little fellow who was standing next to a small cup of ice cream and chewing on it. What do you think? The little fellow looked like a mouse, but it had a long, furry tail and a pair of big, bright eyes. Right now, it was scooping ice cream from the cup with a small spoon. Hearing Wuxia's words, the little fellow wiped away the cream stuck to its whiskers and said, "I see." Then, it buried its head back into its food. Cheto's gaze moved away from the little fellow. Although they had seen the cat before, it had never shown itself in this form before. If it had shown itself at that time, it would have attracted a lot of attention. Sillin sure hid that cat well. Over at the asteroid belt, Sillin made a pause gesture just when the enemy was about to make their move. Then he asked, "Are there any weapons restrictions?" The duo paused for a moment and didn't say anything. A while later, Wuxia replied, "Don't bring out that arrogant lightning shooting cannon of yours. We don't have anything like that anyway." In other words, anything except that weapon was fine. Sillin jumped down from Hui Mao's back, and his armor automatically attached to the asteroid. The 2 opponents flew over from the opposite planet the moment Sillin made his move. Because of the acceleration of the protective armor, it only took a blink of an eye for them to land a few meters away from Sillin. "Is it okay this time?" the other party asked. It was hard to tell whether it was a man or a woman, nor could it tell their age. It was neither fast nor slow, and there were no loopholes. "Do you assassins know how to wait for the start, before killing?" As soon as Sillin's words fell, the other party made their move. Being able to wait for the other party to be ready in this space station was also giving Sillin face. Just like Wuxia said, this was just a competition, not an assassination. Sillin moved his hand, and the slender long knife appeared. Sillin didn't intend to hide this. He believed that with Wuxia's ability, he should know something. Even if he wasn't sure, he would still suspect Sillin. The other party's figure disappeared in a flash. When the two knives collided, only a brief flash of light could be seen. The next moment, a similar flash appeared in another place. When the other party lashed out with the spiked whip, Hui Mao transformed back into his fat kitten form under everyone's dumbfounded gazes. Hui Mao's behavior surprised the members of the 11th Squad. Hui Mao had always thought that the ferocious form was the most suitable for Lord Cat. Before the battle, Lord Cat would show off his ferocious form, and most of the time, Hui Mao would appear in that form, just like when he was fighting the robots. But why would he transform back in front of everyone? Inside the aircraft, Wuxia, who was holding a cup of ice cream, paused for a moment before he smiled. "Piglet, that kid is so cunning. How can he hide so well?" Everyone wanted to see how Hui Mao would fight in that form, but Sillin had already told Hui Mao to transform back as soon as the battle started. With Hui Mao's speed, there was no way he would be injured. Even if he ran a lap around the asteroid belt, he wouldn't be caught. Sillin was confident in this. What puzzled Sillin was why Wuxia wanted to force Hui Mao out. Wuxia didn't arrange this so-called sky battle to see the combat power of the other members of the 11th Squad. If he really wanted to see it, why didn't he choose a planet to fight on land? Why did he choose to fight in space? Sillin thinks that something suddenly occurred to him when he saw Wuxia pick up another cup of ice cream. Sherhua Jing had told Sillin that there was someone in Wuxia who was very interested in cyborgs. Chapter 384. Over at the asteroids, Sillin was blocking one attack after another. His opponent's movements were quick, but he didn't feel the slightest bit of discomfort or awkwardness in this kind of environment. It was almost as if his movements had become one with the armor he was wearing. Every time his armor accelerated, it was just right, not too early, not too late, and not in the slightest. His opponent was already fast to begin with, and with this acceleration his attacks became even more powerful. Moreover, if he were to use an assassination technique, his chances of success wouldn't be any lower than if he were in a normal environment. This was Wuxia's killer move. No matter what the environment was like, he would always be able to maintain his peak performance and not be limited by the environment. Sillin's armor didn't have this acceleration function, but it did allow Sillin to remain unaffected by the environment. Every step he took, every jump he made, every step he took, he would move as if he were in a place with normal gravity. Blade light flashed, and the dagger-like knife that was blocked by Sillin's long sword curved strangely in the next moment. Then, it bypassed the long sword like a venomous snake and shot straight between Sillin's brows. Celine leaned to the side and lowered her body. Her long sword pierced through her back and blocked the snake-like blade gleam. The light from the crisscrossing blades flashed again. Inside the 11th Squad starship, everyone was staring intently at the screen. The more they watched, the stranger they felt. After looking at the screen for a while, Yudi breathed a sigh of relief. Sillin shouldn't be in any danger anymore. While Sillin was worried, the gray cat wasn't making any progress on its side either. Its running skills were too good, and the whip-wielding man was starting to feel a little helpless as he chased after it. The cat was fast, and it would run for a while before turning around to see if the man had caught up to it. If they hadn't, it would scratch them once before continuing to run again. "I think that guy must be feeling pretty depressed right now," Carrie commented as he watched the whip-wielding man chase after Hui Mao. Xiao Shang and Mogaz nodded in agreement. The tension in the air had lessened significantly. "It's too rare, it's really too rare." Phoebe exclaimed excitedly. What's too rare? Carrie and the others looked at Phoebe in confusion. It's the one with the whip. My idol. In fact, my use of the whip was also influenced by Taipana. I was fortunate enough to see it once when I was with the main team. Phoebe explained. You've seen that guy? No, to be precise, the whip flashed by, and the target's head was pierced through, and he fell straight down, Phoebe said. Phoebe was quite excited at the thought of that experience. Because of that shock, Phoebe later chose to use a whip as a weapon. However, she didn't choose the exact same whip as Taipanahan's because she wasn't used to it and it wasn't suitable for her. In the end, she still chose this knuckle whip. After a few years, seeing Taipanahan again, Phoebe still couldn't suppress her excitement. She actually saw her idol again. It was still so clear. Although she still couldn't see the face, Phoebe was already satisfied. Taipanahan. Yudi thought for a moment. There was not much information about wuxia. He also knew that there was such a person in wuxia, but not every name could be matched. Wuxia always appeared and disappeared mysteriously. Most of the people in this organization had never seen their true faces. In the name of Taipanahan, Nahan was his real name. Taipanahan was just his code name. Taipanahan was a type of snake. This type of snake was quite venomous, and its continuous attack speed was extremely fast. Once the code name was connected to the person, one would know what kind of person it was as soon as they heard the code name. However, even this venomous and fast snake was a headache when it encountered Huimao. When Silin blocked the attack and retreated out of the opponent's attack range, he looked in Huimao's direction and saw the cat bite the whip. The sharp spikes on the whip retracted after Huimao bit the whip and were replaced by a flash of electricity. The electricity flowed along the whip and quickly spread to Huimao's body. Oh my god, meow! Huimao let go of the whip and retreated, his face a little twisted. The corner of Silin's mouth twitched when he saw Huimao's expression. He swung his saber and parried the attack from the person behind him, then rushed toward Huimao's side. The person fighting Silin paused for a moment, then chased after Huimao in the end. Whether it was the people on the 11th Squadron starship or those on Wuxia's side, everyone was puzzled by the actions of the man and cat. Could it be that the cat had been struck dumb by the electricity on the whip? Was that why Silin rushed over because he was worried about Huimao? That was what most people thought. However, the truth was always out of everyone's expectations. Silin's speed grew faster and faster. Just as Huimao's whiskers began to tremble, Silin jumped into the air and jumped behind Huimao. Just as Silin jumped, Huimao opened his mouth. Puff! Like a torrential rain, a pile of metal fragments sprayed out of Huimao's mouth and shot toward the two people on the other side. The duo was a little flustered by the sudden turn of events, and they didn't even have time to jump out of the way. They swung their weapons to block the metal shards, but the amount of metal shards Whis had spat out was simply too much. Moreover, it was urgent, fast, and sudden. It really did put them in a difficult position for a moment. The metal fragments were not in their original state. Many of them were half-melted and had some unknown substance stuck to them. It was definitely not human gastric juice. It was a disgusting sight. Seeing this scene, Wuxia spat out the ice cream in his mouth. What the hell did this cat eat? While speaking, Wuxia poked the little guy on the table who was holding a spoon with its front paws and staring at the screen in a daze. Won't you get indigestion from eating that stuff? The little guy's whiskers trembled, but he didn't say anything. On the other side, after Huimao spat out the ice cream, he sneezed twice. Another wave of metal fragments sprayed out, but it was a lot better than before. Smacking his lips, Huimao stroked the fur around his mouth, then tilted his head and scratched the base of his ears with his hind legs. The two people who had just blocked the hidden weapons suddenly stopped and turned to look behind Huimao. There, Silin was pointing the Purgatory Thunder Snake K at them. The two looked at each other, then put away the tools in their hands and retreated. If they were on a real battlefield, Silin would definitely have opened fire while the other party was dodging the hidden weapons. With Silin's marksmanship, even if they didn't both get shot, at least one of them would get shot. If the person who fired was someone else, they might not have stopped so quickly. However, this person was Silin. According to the information they received, Silin was a very mysterious person. Moreover, the gun in his hand gave them a very dangerous feeling. Assassins had always trusted their instincts. Therefore, they didn't need much time to think before they decisively retreated. Anyway, their mission was completed. Although this so-called space battle didn't turn out very well, the two believed that Boss Ian had found the answer. Space battle? What a joke! Why would assassins play this kind of game, where they openly fought? Were they playing monkeys? Even if they practiced, they would use assassination missions to practice. This kind of thing could only be used as a pastime. Their space battles always ended with the death of the target. This so-called space battle was just an excuse for Boss Ian to find the answer. The two of them were just here to play. That was all. This is the end? Everyone in the starship was stunned. It was over just like that? They felt like they had been tricked. Silin put away his gun and patted Hui Mao, who was licking his claws. Let's go. Don't eat random things in the future. I didn't eat random things. It was just that I suddenly felt like vomiting when I was electrocuted. I ate too much. Those robots are really disgusting. I haven't even finished digesting them. Hui Mao transformed into his powerful mode and carried Silin back to the starship. Silin, did you guess from the beginning that the other party wasn't going to be serious? Hui Mao asked. I had that feeling. Also, if my opponent was in the middle of an assassination, his telescopic knife should be black and not reflect light. It's just that because of the nature of this space station, the other party didn't use that kind of assassination tool. Think about it. As the boss of an assassin organization, Wuxia, why would he suggest such a childish method of competition? Then what does that old man want? It's probably because of you. Me? What does he want with me? Hui Mao exploded. It hated being someone else's research subject. It might not necessarily be you. I heard that there's a person in Wuxia who likes to eat ice cream. He's very interested in cyborgs, and Wuxia also likes to eat ice cream. He was eating it during our previous conversations. So, it should be him. Hui Mao was silent for a moment, then said, Silin, why don't we eliminate that old man first? Silin pulled on Hui Mao's ear. Don't even think about it. That old man is very cunning. After returning to the 11th Squad starship, Hui Mao Wuxia was waiting in front of the holographic screen. Alright, you win this time. Wuxia's tone was very casual. It was almost as if he was saying, fine, you can drink this extra cup of water. Hui Mao squatted on Silin's shoulder and stared at Wuxia with hostility. The more he looked at this old man, the more cunning he felt. Due to Hui Mao's intense gaze, Wuxia put down the ice cream in his hand and asked, Little fat cat, do you have something against me? Hui Mao raised his chin. I know you're plotting something against me. After a pause, he said, Are you going to do something improper to me? Hui Mao Wuxia. The little guy sitting on the table next to Hui Mao Wuxia also widened his eyes. Was this cat's brain still working? Silin flicked Hui Mao's ear. That last line shouldn't be used in this situation. I told you not to watch those pornographic films like you. You'll turn into an idiot if you watch too many of them. Hui Mao swung his tail in annoyance and harumphed. Alright, let's get back to business. I said I would tell you something if you won, so I'll fulfill my promise now. Hui Mao Wuxia straightened his face and said, This information is about several core members of Vanguard. Someone is going to assassinate the higher-ups of Vanguard, and there are at least 10 people on their hit list. As for whether Ji Feng is on that list or not, I'm not sure. Assassinate the higher-ups of Vanguard? Fog. Silin only thought of this assassin organization that was on par with Hui Mao Wuxia. The other assassin organizations wouldn't have the guts to do something like this. Correct. Why didn't you tell Captain Ji Feng? Why should I tell Ji Feng? Uncle Ian said casually. However, if he told Silin, Silin would definitely tell Ji Feng. Hui Mao Wuxia didn't care if Ji Feng knew about this. Silin thinks for a moment and said, I'll tell the captain about this. Is there anything else? Not for now. Oh, there's one more thing. I'm very interested in the cat on your shoulder, but don't worry, I won't do anything to it. In fact, in some ways, I'm on the same side as you. After saying this, Hui Mao Wuxia hung up. The aircraft also flew away and soon disappeared from everyone's sight. On the same side? Silin still didn't understand the true meaning of Hui Mao Wuxia's words. By the time he understood, the two of them were already engaged in a fierce battle. Inside Hui Mao Wuxia's aircraft, the little guy who had finished another big cup of ice cream was already squatting in Hui Mao Wuxia's arms and dozing off. His long, furry tail was wrapped around his body, and he looked very satisfied. Hui Mao Wuxia stroked the snow-white fur of the little guy in his arms and said, "How is it? How do you feel?" This sentence wasn't directed at the little guy in his arms, but at the two people standing not far away. These two people were the ones who had gone out to fight Silin and Hui Mao. "That guy is hiding his strength," the person beside Tai Panhan said. He had fought with Celine for a period of time. Although he hadn't used his best skills and hadn't used his true strength, he could still see some things. Hiding his strength? Yes, I think there were 3 times when he could have killed me in one hit, but I don't know if it's because it was just a sparring match or something else, but he didn't use his full strength, the person said confidently. "That's true," Hui Mao Wuxia said slowly. "Even now, no one knows how strong Silin really is. Also, didn't you notice that he doesn't need to use force when he can? For example, the virus that caused the miracle, or the reason why the Skeleton King and his subordinates died a few years ago according to the information you've gathered. He didn't use force at all, he relied on other methods. He wasn't able to kill Osculo because of his combat prowess. There could be other factors as well. Actually, we all know that a person's combat prowess isn't that scary. What's scary is the ability to kill a large group of people without using any sort of combat prowess. Out of all the people we've come into contact with, people like that are the most dangerous because their destructive power is impossible to estimate. Not to mention that kid has both. Also, I don't know what deal that kid made with Gaydar, but I know that Gaydar is the kind of person who won't care if the difference in strength is too big. Being able to talk to him and build a relationship means that Gaydar values Silin a lot. Someone wanted to make a deal with Azrael for Silin's life, but Azrael refused. Others thought it was because of Gaydar, but I think it was Si Huang who made the decision. Hui Mao Wuxia said this for his subordinates. He rarely spoke so much at once, but this time, the people on the space plane would take it seriously. Silin didn't know what Hui Mao Wuxia's people thought of him. After he contacted Ji Feng, he told him about his conversation with Wuxia. However, Ji Feng seemed to be prepared for this. It's time for them to make a move. Chapter 385. Silin knew that Moon and Shimu were busy working on the box that Sigma was holding like a treasure. He thought that they would wait until they returned to the base before carrying out the awakening plan Moon mentioned. However, Silin couldn't help but wonder why Moon was in such a hurry. Did something happen? No, that can't be right. Judging from Moon's reaction, it should be something good. Silin followed Moon to Shimu's workshop on the starship. Shikai, Sigma, and the others were already waiting for him. The box was placed on a silver-gray metal workbench. There were 2 orbs of light floating inside the open box. Some data was flashing on the device next to them. Whis jumped onto the metal workbench and circled around the box twice. It could sense the machine language coming from the 2 balls of light, but it was very weak and incomplete. That was why there were only some messy data characters flashing on the instrument next to it, and they couldn't be connected into a string. "What's going on?" Silin asked. "They're awake." Sigma looked very excited. "But we can't get in touch with them. Moon and I tried, but we can't get through to them. I don't know what's going on." Yu, Shimu, and the others had been busy retrieving the brains of Rifia and Zoel that Chip had kept. Back then, the Shi family had only used the materials and not the brains. At most, they had tried to replicate it, but the brains weren't seriously damaged. After all, the Shi family knew how important a brain was to a robot. Therefore, they could be awakened as long as the conditions were met. Moon and Sigma had been trying to communicate with the 2 core brain regions inside the box for a while now, but the 2 core brain regions didn't respond at all. But just now, Moon and Shimu had just finished a game of Chain Stars. While the three of them were discussing the game, the two core brain regions suddenly reacted. The box on the metal table suddenly opened, and two clusters of light floated into the air. The instruments around them also reacted strangely. Moon told Celine about what happened just now, and his nervousness was obvious from his tone. The two orbs of light in the core brain region were reacting. Did this mean that the two of them could wake up? What should we do? Even Moon found it hard to calm down when he thought about Rufia and Zol's situation. Everything had happened too suddenly, and he had planned to deal with it after returning to the 11th Squad's base. He did not expect something to happen here. Fortunately, he had brought all the materials with him just in case. Did you encounter a similar situation when you were creating Cheto, Celine? Shimu asked. Shimu was the one who asked you to bring Celine over. He thought Celine might be able to provide some advice. Back in the day, Celine had done many calculations based on the advantages of the first-generation liquid core brain. It wasn't until Celine was satisfied with the final results that Celine was satisfied with. Adding that to the fact that he had discovered that miraculous crystal at the time, he had turned some of his theoretical designs into reality. That was how Cheto came to be after all sorts of coincidences. At the time, Cheto was nothing more than a newborn robot. He was like a newborn baby. His potential was there, but he didn't know much at all. After that, Cheto was the one who improved himself almost all the time. Right now, not even Celine could understand the complicated structure of Cheto's brain. Celine stared at the two floating balls of light. He hadn't created Cheto like this when he first created him. Maybe it was because Cheto had changed a lot during his development, but his initial state wasn't exactly the same. That being said, there were still similarities between the two. After quietly sensing the information transmitted from the two light clusters, Celine said, "This should be a normal phenomenon. It's just like how ordinary animals undergo a long period of hibernation. Due to the long period of hibernation, their brain activity has always been at an extremely low level. Even if they were to wake up, they would need to go through a period of adaptation. But these two," Celine pointed at the two light clusters in front of him, "are in this adaptation period. They are not awake, but their brains have already begun to move." Shimu nodded. He was thinking the same thing, but he hadn't created an original robot himself. There were many things that only existed in theory. He wasn't as convincing as Celine was. Celine and Shimu discussed for a moment. Half an hour later, they came up with a plan. Celine walked to the side and pointed at a certain direction. Then he said to Ayu, "Put the box inside, Ai." Shimu was already adjusting the apparatus in the direction Celine was pointing at. Ayu carefully dragged the box and moved it into a transparent cylindrical cabin. It was the same cabin Shimu and Shikai used when they were making robots. Unlike the mass-produced ones, the one in Shimu's workshop was much more complicated in terms of configuration and parameters. After discussing with Celine, Shimu decided to adjust some of the parameters. After Ayu put the box inside, Shimu pressed a button and closed the cabin door. Through the transparent wall, everyone could see the two balls of light floating inside. Cheto and the White Spirit also walked into the room. Celine was the one who informed them to be cautious in case they needed more help when the time came. Moreover, Celine also hoped that Cheto could learn more from this incident. It would be very helpful to Cheto, who was also a robot himself. Celine and Ayu each took control of a couple of apparatus. After they were done adjusting the apparatus, Celine shot Shimu a questioning look. After receiving an affirmative answer, they pressed the start button at the same time. The environment inside the cabin was changing rapidly. The composition of the ions, gases, pressure and temperature inside the cabin were changing rapidly, and the magnetic field was adjusting in a regular pattern. Both Celine and Shimu stared closely at the icons and data displayed on the apparatus. They needed to make adjustments according to the data displayed. After a period of instability, the graphs and data on the apparatus finally calmed down. However, the two balls of light inside the cabin didn't show any obvious changes. Moreover, the line on the graph was rising very slowly, meaning that the two balls of light were awakening very slowly as well. This can't go on. Silin thinks for a moment before saying to Ayu, "Try to communicate with them." Although there was a wall between them, it wasn't a problem for Ayu with his abilities. Ayu followed Silin's instructions and tried to communicate with the two balls of light inside the cabin. However, the results weren't very good. The line on the graph was changing, but the change was too small to meet Silin's expectations. Silin frowned and fell into deep thought. From the corner of his eye, he saw the gray cat looking at the data displayed on the instrument, and some data symbols were flashing in its eyes. The fellow was just trying to decipher the disjointed data symbols created by the two balls of light on the instrument out of boredom, but it just so happened to give Silin an inspiration. "Try to communicate with them using data stream mapping," Silin said to Ayu. Shimu's eyes flashed when he heard Silin's suggestion. He looked at Huimao and Silin before turning back to the monitor. He didn't expect Silin to be so much more powerful than he thought. His understanding of machine language was far beyond his expectations. It was because of this that Shimu knew how rare it was for humans to be able to understand machine language. Even among the Shi family, there might not be one in several generations. On the other hand, Celine, who was not a member of the Shi family, had a better understanding than Shi Kai, who was a true descendant of the Shi family. Ayu didn't pay attention to what Shimu was thinking. He was only concerned about the two balls of light inside the cabin. They were his brothers. He hadn't seen them for hundreds of years, and the five of them hadn't seen each other for 1,000 years. The arrogant Ruffia, the cold Zoel, are they coming back? Ayu stared at the two balls of light inside the cabin. Two beams of light shot out from his face. They contained all kinds of data. The streams of data were mapped onto the two balls of light. They contained information about the 5 robots and the Shi family of that generation. Ayu hoped to use this information to trigger a reaction in the brains of the two balls of light. Sure enough, after sensing the data stream mapping, the two light clusters flickered. After this flicker, the data on the monitoring instruments connected to the fusion cabin changed drastically. "Yes, that's it. Continue," Silin said as he made some adjustments to the devices and the parameters calculated based on the new data. Both Shimu and Silin had to make the necessary adjustments themselves. There were many times when a machine wasn't necessarily better than a human. For example, when it came to synthesizing robots, the creator was the dominant factor. Only after synthesizing a robot would they be able to develop their own robots. Shikai watched from the side. He didn't interfere because there was nothing he could do. Silin and Shimu were more than enough to control the devices, and their control was very precise. This was something Shikai needed to learn. There was a certain gap between him and the two of them, and he didn't deny it. Silin's hand speed was so fast that Shikai couldn't keep up with it. He had to rely on other visual aids to catch a glimpse of it. Silin alone took care of 60% of the work, Shimu took care of 30%, and the remaining 10% was the work of Ayu, the two balls of light, and the automation of the devices. When the data displayed on the device reached one of Silin's standards, the next step would begin. "Alright, put the materials in," Silin said to Ayu without stopping. Ayu also sensed that the two balls of light were becoming clearer and clearer. He sensed a familiar presence that he hadn't seen for a long time. After Silin said that, Ayu quickly took out the materials he had been hiding and put them into the module's inlet. One of them was very similar to the material Silin used to create Cheto. There were also a couple of extremely rare metals that Ayu had been hiding for a long time. Even the Shi family didn't know about them, and the only reason Ayu had taken them out was to awaken Eurifia and Zoel. The balls of light inside the module grew brighter and brighter. As they moved, the materials were absorbed, shaped, and synthesized on their own. From the beginning to the end, a robot similar to Ayu and Sigma was slowly taking shape inside the module. Eurifia! Zoel! Agitated, Sigma began to circle around the cabin, arms swinging up and down, unsure of what to do. Cheto didn't say a word as he watched Ayu and Cheto. However, he didn't miss a single detail. Everything, including the operation, the calculation rules, the optimal path, the optimal conditions, and so on. The main reason he was able to evolve to his current level was because of his own learning and application abilities. Silin had told him on the day he created Cheto, "I'm only providing you with a starting point. How far you can go is up to you." Cheto was different from Sigma and his siblings. When Silin and Hui Mao left for Mist Bodhisattva for the first time, Cheto had gone on a long journey. He used to walk with the crowd, sit in a coffee shop at a street corner, read an ancient book for an entire afternoon, and experience the life of a normal person. He used to do hard labor with the lowest rung of society. He used to live in a shipping container ghetto. He used to work with elites who were dressed up in a hurry. He used to work with the hunters who were considered unimportant by the four great powers. He used to travel through dangerous jungles and experience the urgency of a normal person facing a crisis. When the lanterns were first lit, the suburbs and the civilian district beyond the border started to grow quiet, and the romance inside the city started to go crazy. Cheto had experienced two completely different nights before. He was lying in a simple house in the civilian district and listening to the snoring of the old miner next door. He was also riding a hoverboard in the city and following the screaming youngsters through the flashing neon lights. It was only after these experiences that Cheto finally understood. So this is the life of a human. He wasn't a cold machine after all. Silin had told him that he could create another robot, but there was only one Cheto. Cheto wasn't envious of Sigma's 5 siblings. He had brothers of his own, such as Wheeze, Silin, and Carrie. They might be humans or cyborgs, but they were brothers who had gone through thick and thin with each other. They were brothers who he could entrust his back to. Moon and Sigma had always been praised by the 11th Squad and everyone who saw them, but Cheto had always kept a low profile. Most of the time, the 11th Squad had already treated him as one of their own instead of a robot. Hui Mao flicked his ears and yawned when he saw what was going on. Then, he jumped onto Cheto's shoulder. Silin was busy, so he didn't dare disturb Silin. That was why he crouched on Cheto's shoulder instead. He wasn't interested in the two robots, and neither was he interested in them. After finding a suitable angle, Hui Mao leaned his head against Cheto's neck and dozed off. Chapter 386. The two robots inside the capsule had been perfected, and most of the work was done by the robots themselves. Silin and Shimu didn't need to do anything else, so they simply sat on the side and watched the data displayed on the monitor. The two new robots were created based on the programming in their brains, and they looked very similar to Sigma and Moon. Why else would they call them brothers? When the two robots were done, the light bars on their faces flashed, and the cabin doors opened on their own. The change in air pressure made a hissing sound. The two new robots flew out of the capsule, and Sigma and Moon jumped toward them excitedly before they could say anything. After so many years, the four brothers were reunited once more. Chip was the only one left. Not wanting to interrupt the four brothers' bonding session, Silin walked out of Shimu's workshop and went back to his own room to rest. Although the process of synthesizing these two robots wasn't long, the amount of calculation involved was just too great. This was especially true in the beginning. He was practically operating like a machine. Thankfully, things were a little easier towards the end, and Silin had a buffer period. This time, he was creating two robots at once, so it was only natural that the amount of calculation required was a lot more than before. Unlike the time when he created Cheto, most of the calculations were done in real time. After stretching his aching arms a little, Silin walked back to his room. Hui Mao jumped off Cheto's shoulder the moment Silin came out. He winked at Cheto and said, "I won't disturb you anymore, boy. You can pick up girls now." Cheto flicked Hui Mao's ear with a smile and left Shimu's workshop as well. He had learned a lot of new things just now, and he needed time to think about them. The 11th Squad had gained 2 new members, but it was a new problem for Shimu. It was fine back when Sigma and Moon were the only ones in the group. Moon was the only one who would speak from time to time, and Shimu didn't think much of it. Now that there were 2 more Sigma and Moon, Shimu didn't think much of it. Perhaps it was because the 4 of them were in a group, but the quiet Sigma and Moon seemed to have become more talkative, and they couldn't stop chatting. In the end, Shimu couldn't take it anymore and kicked all 4 of them out of the workshop. He really didn't know how that generation of She family members could tolerate these 5 troublemakers. Sometimes, the 4 of them would play a human pyramid with Sigma at the bottom. Sometimes, the 4 of them would mess around with Shueisha and the others. Even a game of chess would turn into a war. Either way, the atmosphere on the 11th Squad's starship was pretty good as of late. It was festive and lively, and the 4 robots kept Sigma's indoor orchard in perfect order. Not only that, but they also helped Mo Heng and Shikai a lot. Old Mo was very fond of the 4 little robots. He had worked with robots for many years, but this was the first time he had interacted with so many human-like robots. Aside from their appearance, they were practically human. Moreover, they had different personalities, so Old Mo couldn't help but be delighted to see them. Unlike the others who were relaxed, Silin was now thinking about what to do next. Just now, he received a secret message from Ji-Feng. It was a message that not even Yudi was aware of, and neither was the rest of the 11th Squad. It was about Vanguard as a whole, and it wasn't long before a group of executives from the 11th Squad would arrive at a branch base at Sector Z. There, they would meet with the executives of the Navigators and come to a decision regarding the ownership of a planet. The Vanguard and Navigator squadrons had discovered this planet almost at the same time. It was a habitable planet with a decent size. Right now, the military was busy enough with internal disputes, and the people from the other sectors would not pay much attention to this planet. After all, the 2 hunter regiments had their eyes on this planet, and those family forces would not come and fight with the hunter regiments over this planet. Therefore, it was time for Vanguard and Navigator to come to a decision. It was because the planet was too tempting. After they occupied it, they could build a temporary branch base for expansion, sell it at a high price if they didn't use it in the future, and trade it for a batch of weapons, space planes, and so on. No one was willing to let go of such a fat piece of meat. In fact, this kind of thing wasn't rare at all. It was very common for 2 hunter regiments to come to a conclusion and come to an agreement because of their target. But at this time, it was thought-provoking. This was especially true after Wuxia told Silin the news not long ago. There were even more secrets hidden in this. Ji-Feng was obviously mentally prepared for this, and there was another rumor circulating among the hunter regiments. It was said that this might be the first time Vanguard and Navigator fought head-on, and it might even lead to an all-out war. The friction between the 2 hunter regiments was enough as it was, and this planet was just a fuse that would lead to the biggest conflict between the 2 hunter regiments in the last 50 years. There was no telling if these rumors were true or not, but after this, the B squadrons of both 2-man regiments had already gathered at Sector Z. Logically speaking, a base at Sector K would be more confident, but at the same time, the damage to their base would be greater if a large-scale all-out war broke out. Therefore, both sides had chosen to set up a branch base at Sector Z. This way, they wouldn't have to worry about fighting each other. It was just a temporary branch base anyway, and they wouldn't feel much pain even if the entire planet was destroyed. Ji-Feng had already contacted the 11B squadron commanders in secret and told them everything that might happen. He told them to prepare themselves because it would be an incredibly difficult battle if an all-out war broke out. Other than that, Ji-Feng also told Silin about the meaning behind Wuxia's words. It was very likely that the fog would take advantage of this meeting to kill them, and this was the best opportunity for them. Therefore, Vanguard had more things to pay attention to. Ji-Feng's biggest worry wasn't the Navigator. After all, they were both part of the 4 great hunters, and both sides knew each other better than the other. Ji-Feng's biggest worry was internal problems. Because the hunter regiments were too big, it was impossible to clean out all the traitors, and it wasn't impossible for the backlands to catch fire. The second concern was the assassin organization, FOG. Their assassination targets were a few of Vanguard's higher-ups. Right now, they didn't know how many of Vanguard's higher-ups were on their hit list, but one thing was for sure, these higher-ups were the most influential people in Vanguard. If anything happened to any of them, it would be a huge loss for Vanguard. When the time came, the 11 squads definitely wouldn't be at the front lines. The A squadron would hold the front lines, and they would provide support from the rear. The big move that Ji Feng made during the last meeting at the base was actually because he had scattered some of the best seedlings among the various B squadrons. This was because they were less affected by the attacks in the B squadrons, and these people were the future hope of Vanguard. When they grew up, they would become another batch of peak strength. The dispersal and relegation this time was actually a kind of protection for these people. The abilities of these people were indeed uneven, and the people who were truly valued by the higher-ups were mixed among them. This was the main reason for the action that time. As it turned out, Ji Feng had already started making all kinds of arrangements since then. There will be a war between the four great hunters sooner or later. Lan Hudi and Heaven's Birth are currently at war, and Vanguard and Navigator can't possibly stop either. Once the war breaks out, both sides will lose a lot of people. That's why we have to protect those who haven't matured yet. If our seniors are unfortunate enough to fall in this war, at least we'll have someone to take over our position in the future. We won't allow Vanguard to decline. This was what Ji Feng told Silin. He didn't tell all the other captains this, and he only told the people he truly trusted. At the same time, he was reminding Silin that the 11th squad shouldn't go to the front lines and that they should stay with the other squads. Mogaz, Mao, and the others were all potential members who hadn't matured yet, so they shouldn't be sent to the front lines. Silin, help me protect them. That was what Ji Feng said before he disconnected the call. This puzzled Silin a lot. Even if Mogaz and the others were people the higher-ups thought highly of, Ji Feng didn't necessarily care too much about them. While Silin was puzzling over this, Wuxia sent him another message. I just received the news. I'm just informing you that someone in your squad is on the Mist's hit list. Be prepared. It might even be you. Remember to stay alive when the time comes. On the screen, Uncle Ian was happily munching on a box of ice cream. On top of his head was a small, furry animal that looked like a mouse. It had big ears and was about the size of a rabbit. It stared at Silin for a while before losing interest and hopping off to the side to play. You don't know who it is either? Silin asked. I won't tell you even if I do. Silin. Fine, let's change the question. Is there only one person on the hit list? Silin asked again. As far as I know, there's only one. However, if the assassin gets excited, he can take out a few more of them. That's why your squad has to worry, kid. Silin fell silent for a moment. Thank you for the reminder. Is there anything else? Nothing for now. Oh, if you can't handle it, you can hire someone from our organization to protect you. What's the condition? That fat cat of yours. Silin ended the call immediately. On the other side of the call, Wuxia bit his spoon of ice cream and rubbed the head of the little fellow who had jumped into his arms again. It looks like this isn't going to be easy. Before returning to the base at Sector Z, Silin observed the 5 Mogaz members for a bit. He had a feeling that the person on the miss hit list that Wuxia mentioned was one of the 5 new members of their squad. Ji Feng wouldn't have said something like that otherwise. As for who it was, Silin didn't know. He had even talked to all 5 of them separately, but he couldn't find anything out of them. They're hiding this well? Well, if I can't find them now, then I won't look for them for now. The starship had returned to the base at Sector Z, but they didn't have much time left. Everyone had learned about the current situation of the hunter regiments through various channels even without Silin's reminder. Are we really going to fight navigators, Silin? Carrie rubbed his palms together eagerly. Maybe. It's always good to be prepared, Silin replied. I'll make sure to prepare as much as I can. Carrie dragged Xiaoshang and the others away to discuss how to fix navigators when the time came. What are you worried about? Yudi asked. Although an all-out war could break out, Yudi knew that a squad like the 11th squad wouldn't be at the front lines. Therefore, they wouldn't be attacked as fiercely as they were. I'm not worried about the navigators. With our team strength, even if we can't get rid of many of the navigators, we can at least protect ourselves. However, when the time comes, the navigators might not be the only ones. Yudi's heart skipped a beat. You mean, an assassin organization? Ever since they knew that there might be a large-scale battle, Rufia and Zoel, who had just woken up, started to equip themselves with battle equipment. Rufia, in particular, was a battle maniac. He often pestered Mo Heng to exchange some opinions and understand some of the current weapons in the Star Alliance. Hui Mao, on the other hand, was as carefree as ever. All he did was eat and sleep. While the 11th Squad was preparing, the other B squadrons were slowly making their way back to Sector Z. This meant that the time was drawing closer and closer. Silin had contacted Shotun, who was currently with the A Squadron. According to Shotun, they didn't plan to make such a big fuss at first, and they didn't plan to recall all the B squadrons either. However, all kinds of rumors started to spread that Vanguard and Navigator were going to go all out against each other, and Navigator didn't deny it. In fact, they even recalled all the B squadrons under Navigator's command. No wonder they were notified in such a hurry. Ji Feng hadn't planned to involve all 11 squads in the first place. Just like Ji Feng said, the 11 squads were filled with hope for the future, and they were filled with a bunch of good seedlings who had yet to mature. Silin was one of the first to learn about this. Ji Feng had informed Silin about Wuxia beforehand, and Silin was informed of the situation beforehand. Silin, this is going to be a difficult mission. You and your B squadrons must not be careless. Shotun said seriously, I can already sense the tension in the A squadron's atmosphere. This mission is different from any previous one, and no one can tell what will happen when the time comes. Just join the 3rd B squadron when the time comes, Shotun said. Right now, Shotun trusted the 3rd B squadron even more than the 6th Division. Although he had risen from the 6th Division, the 6th Division was no longer the 6th Division it used to be. Moreover, the personnel structure was different due to the demotion, so Shotun's influence on the current 6th Division was negligible. Silin understood what Shotun was trying to say. He was afraid that Silin and the others would be at a disadvantage. If they were to join the 3rd B Squadron, they would be able to take care of the 3rd B Squadron. After all, everyone had a good relationship with each other. Not long after the call with Shotun, Silin received another call from the 3rd B Squadron. They were probably aware of the 11th Squad's situation, so they asked the 11th Squad to join them and take care of each other. Silin didn't refuse the 3rd B Squadron's good intentions. The 11th Squad was simply too small, and even if they were to face an accident, the 3rd B Squadron could still lend them a hand. Out of the entire Vanguard, only the 3rd B Squadron had the best relationship with the 11th Squad. 3 days later, Silin received a summon from Ji Feng. It was a summon for the entire Vanguard, and all 11 squads were to depart immediately after receiving this order. The well-prepared group didn't panic. In fact, Carrie and the others were looking forward to it very much. Before they left, Silin tried to persuade Mo Heng to stay behind again. The old man was old, and he might not be able to take care of everything when the time came. However, Mo Heng was very persistent about this. Look, even Dias's little boy is coming with us. What's there for an old man like me to be afraid of? Plus, I've already written my last will, so I won't blame you even if something happens. My son knows me very well, he knows me very well. Like hell he knows. Silin wanted nothing more than to knock Mo Heng out and toss him into the base. Sir Mo couldn't even come up with an excuse that involved last will. This made Silin feel very helpless. In the end, Mo Heng was surrounded by 4 robots and boarded the starship. Rufia promised Silin that it would protect Sir Mo, but Silin didn't have much faith in its promise. In fact, he didn't even know Rufia as well as Moon. Before they left for the A Squadron, Silin called Yu over and told him to keep an eye on their surroundings while they were protecting Mo Heng. There was a chance that someone might sneak into their base. Sneak into Little 11? Moon asked with a tilt of his head. The enemy must have a powerful background to be able to sneak into the base without Little 11 noticing. That's why I want you 4 to be careful. Alright, I understand. I'll protect Grandpa Mo. With Moon and the others around, even if they couldn't pinpoint the enemy's exact location, they would definitely notice them if they snuck into the base. What about you? Aren't you, Cheto and Whis inside the starship? Moon asked. I don't know what's going to happen when the time comes. I may have to go out, and Cheto and Whis may have their own opponents. Therefore, I'll leave Little 11 to you 4. The light bar on Moon's face flashed for a moment before he said, I understand. Little Bai is here too. Moon was a very smart robot, and he was able to analyze a lot of things from Silin's words. Although Moon often looked unreliable, he was the real leader of the group. Even the conceited Rufia and the uncommunicative Zoel viewed Moon as their leader under certain circumstances. The starship passed through an asteroid belt and a couple of non-habitable planets. It was then that they saw other B squadrons heading toward the base. However, it wasn't the third B squadron, it was the second B squadron. Since they weren't familiar with each other, they simply greeted each other and went their separate ways. There were a lot of people in the 2nd B Squadron who mocked the 11th Squad because the 11th Squad was just a small starship that couldn't even compare to a child starship of the 2nd B Squadron. Even a small squadron of the 2nd B Squadron was much larger than the 11th degrees. The B Squadrons that were heading toward the A Squadron's base were all attached to motherships, and some of them were even accompanied by some corvettes or space planes. It was a grand sight to behold. Therefore, the 11th Squad looked incredibly weak at first glance. The 11th Squads didn't enter the A Squadron's base directly. In fact, they didn't even approach it. Instead, they stayed close to the planet and the smaller planets around it. The 3rd B Squadron went straight to the 11th Squad's base after they arrived. In the eyes of the other B Squadrons, the 3rd B Squadron was playing the role of babysitter. By the time all 11 B Squadrons had arrived, the A Squadron's fleet was ready to depart. There were 3 A Squadron starships, and all of them were large composite starships. The space planes and fighters that were scattered around the spaceport flew into the A Squadron after the 3 large composite starships left the spaceport. "Awoo, it's time to depart." Carrie cheered. Yes, the 11 B Squadrons were only here for one meeting. They would follow the A Squadron's starships to the negotiation site, and it was very likely that they would fight there. Mo Hung clicked his tongue in wonder as he stared at the A Squadron's 3 starships on the screen. These 3 starships are big enough to carry all 11 of your squadrons. The A Squadron's starships sure look impressive. They're all free starships, but they give off a different vibe, Diaz said. The A Squadron's 3 composite starships were about the same size as the B Squadron's, but they gave off a very special vibe. It was easy to tell who belonged to the A Squadron and who belonged to the B Squadrons at first glance. That's why those people can only be part of the B Squadrons. That being said, if our squadron's free starships are bigger, there's no way we'll lose to the A Squadron starships. Yudi was confident in this. Where's Silin? Mo Heng asked when he didn't see Silin. He saw Silin a moment ago, but he was gone in the blink of an eye. Shouldn't he be in the command room, ready to give orders at a moment's notice? I received a transfer just now, Yudi explained. The transmissions were too secret, and Silin normally didn't use them in the command room. Instead, he used them in his own lounge. Cheto and the Grey Cat were there, so they wouldn't be eavesdropped. Silin was indeed on the receiving end of a call, but it wasn't the one Yudi mentioned. It was Songba Leruo who was on the receiving end of the call. It was to remind Silin to pay attention to the situation in the squad, especially the new members. And now, it was Uncle Ian who was on the receiving end of the call. Mist has arrived. Keep an eye out for them. Alright, it's still the same thing. If you need help, you can come to us directly. We're here as well. What are you here for? Are you here to watch the show? Silin asked. I'm not that bored. I'm just here to take out a few people I don't like. Don't worry, they're not from Vanguard. I don't like Ji-Fong either, but since he's that monster Nibela's target, I won't interfere. Wuxia said. Nibela was the current leader of Mist. Silin was very impressed by Mist and No Pardon. Uncle Ian had told him that they had arrived at the coordinates, so he was sure that both the Vanguard and the Navigator were feeling nervous. Of course, this was only limited to those who knew about this information. Those who didn't probably wouldn't know that these 2 famous assassin organizations in the League of Stars were here, would they? A dozen or so large-sized composite ships, and almost 100 medium-sized ships and child ships. This kind of lineup could be considered huge. Although it wasn't all of Vanguard's strength, it was still shocking enough. Other than the B Squadrons who were carrying out missions and those who were stationed at the base, the rest of the B Squadrons were gathered here. A portion of the A Squadron was stationed at the main camp at Sector K, and the rest were stationed at the subbase at Sector Z. However, half of the higher-ups were here, including Songba Lerwo and Bart. The people on Miss Assassination list were among them. The target of the negotiation was an area outside of Vanguard and Navigator's territory. It was a free zone, and there was a rank B habitable planet here. It used to belong to the military, but after the League of Stars' military split up, there was no one to manage it. This time, the planet was forcefully requisitioned because of the incident involving the 2 hunter regiments. The military didn't say anything when they learned about it. It was just a normal rank B habitable planet anyway, so they could do whatever they wanted. "Look, it's Navigator's men," Carrie said excitedly as he looked at the scene on the screen. On the screen, on the other side of the planet, a fleet about the same size as Vanguard's was parked in a formation. They had just arrived not too long ago. After all the motherships had come to a stop, the composite mothership began to split apart. The child ships and accompanying starships, space planes, and fighters separated from the mothership. In an instant, the fleet's range expanded several times, and it was now densely packed with starships, space planes, and fighters. If one were to look at it from a further angle, they would see the following image. 2 fleets were spread out on both sides of a not-so-big planet. They looked like a pair of half-spread wings that sandwiched the planet in the middle. The 11th Squad starships were not eye-catching at the periphery of Vanguard's wing. They were surrounded by the 3rd B Squadron's child ships and some large space planes, warships, and space fighters. The 11th Squad starships did not stand out at all. "Don't we need to go out?" Carrie adjusted his equipment and asked Sillin. Xiao Shang and the others were also looking at Sillin expectantly, but Sillin didn't agree. Now wasn't the time yet. The 11th Squadron starships weren't all that eye-catching, but the 11th Squadron's fighter jets were. It wasn't that the fighter jets were flashy, but rather that they were custom-made fighter jets with extremely high performance. Coupled with the fact that Xiao Shang and the others couldn't hold themselves back, the 11th Squadron's fighter jets would be exposed before the battle even began. It was the time to gauge each other's strength before the battle began, so Sillin wasn't going to let Carrie and the others go out just yet. After Ji Feng left an order for the squadron leaders, one of the A Squadron starships flew toward the planet. The first batch of Vanguard's Vanguard troops were already waiting for them there, and Navigator's situation was the same. The B Squadron, on the other hand, stayed at the periphery of the planet and spread out in a certain formation. This way, they wouldn't be able to hurt their own people easily even if a fight broke out. Chapter 387. The negotiations on the planet had already begun, and the people on the B squadrons could only see the general situation outside the planet through the transmissions. They couldn't know the specifics of the negotiations, and they would choose their next course of action based on the signal sent by the A squadron. Although they couldn't see the negotiations happening on the planet, the tension radiating from the planet had infected everyone around it. The large images on both sides of the planet showed the factions of both sides, but there wasn't even a band music playing right now. The starships were all quiet, and the only thing that added a hint of liveliness to the solemn atmosphere was the fighter jets flying around outside. According to Sillin's knowledge, there were 3 vice commanders in the entire Vanguard's upper echelon. Vice Commander Soloist stayed at Sector K's headquarters, Vice Commander Kong Ling stayed at Sector Z's branch base, and Stanley was the only one who came with Ji Feng. This meant that as the only vice commander who came with Ji Feng, there was a high chance that Stanley was on the Fog's assassination list. Sillin stared at the name list in his hand and pondered. He felt that there were a lot of things that Ji Feng didn't explain to him clearly, and these secrets would probably be exposed after this war. Just as Sillin was thinking about some of the things he didn't understand, the communicator in his hand suddenly flashed. It didn't have a fixed frequency, and it was like a secret signal that told Sillin who the caller was. Sillin raised his hand and motioned for the others to continue paying attention to the A Squadron's movements. Then he returned to his own lounge. "What's wrong this time?" Sillin looked at Wuxia on the hologram and asked. "I'm just checking to see how your preparations are going." Uncle Ian was still holding a box of ice cream and eating leisurely. He picked a mouthful for himself and another mouthful for the little animal nestled in his arms. If there's nothing important, I'm going to disconnect. Don't be hasty. You youngsters just can't keep your cool. Wuxia passed the box to the little animal in his arms. It was only the size of 2 fists, but it was able to hold a small bucket of ice cream so easily. It was impossible for a normal animal to do so. I just wanted to remind you this time. Don't get angry if something happens later. Such as your starship changing owners. I'm guessing. With Ji Feng's personality, if he sensed that the negotiations weren't going well and the war was about to escalate, he definitely wouldn't put all his hopes on you. Are you talking about the person in our team who's on the Mist's hit list? Correct. Actually, I think the people from Mist must have leaked some information to Tamir. Tamir wouldn't let go of this opportunity to attack Ji Feng. The tamer that Wuxia was talking about was the current leader of the navigators. He was one of the 6 stars of Hunter, just like Ji Feng. Why is that person so important? Is he related to Captain Ji Feng? Hidden Wuxia didn't seem to like Ji Feng, but when he heard Silin's question, he didn't keep quiet like before. Instead, he said, they are related, but it's not just because of their relationship. Ji Feng has a lot of sons, and a few of his grandsons are about the same age as you. However, those people are very low-key, and only a few of them are known to the public. Even if a few of them are killed because of the war, he wouldn't care. However, this one is different. When he said this, Hidden Wuxia's eyes flashed with obvious mockery. From Hidden Wuxia's words, Silin guessed that one of the 5 newcomers must be Ji Feng's descendant. Since Hidden Wuxia said it was his son, then Phoebe and Kong Lujia were eliminated. The only choices were Mao, Mogaz, and Pango. However, Silin had a lot of questions. First, Silin had come into contact with all of them before. He had fought with them, but he hadn't learned any genetic information from them. Second, what was so special about Ji Feng's son? Was he worth Ji Feng, Songba Leruo, and the other higher-ups' nervousness? You want to know? Hidden Wuxia crossed his legs and said smugly, You want to know? Tell me. Of course. Hidden Wuxia adjusted his sitting posture and stroked his short beard. You know Olillo, right? Have you heard of the spell that represents evolution in Olillo? Olillo again? It seems that this person is related to the spell. Silin thought about everything he knew about Olillo. If he was connected to the incantation, then that person must possess some kind of ability. What else? Silin looked at Hidden Wuxia. Uncle Yin's eyes twitched. He only said this to see Silin's reaction, but Silin's reaction was only a little surprise when he first heard it. He was so calm that Hidden Wuxia wanted to slap him. It was obvious that Silin didn't have much ambition for Olillo. Originally, he wanted to persuade Silin to create some trouble for Ji Feng, but he didn't expect it to have such an effect. However, Uncle Yin was very satisfied with the result. Other than that, there's nothing else. Good luck to you. Oh right, I'll mourn for your starship. With that, Hidden Wuxia ended the communication. Silin sat in his room and thought about what Hidden Wuxia said. He felt that these people were all mysterious. Also, Wuxia seemed to be communicating with him more frequently. What was he after? While he was thinking, Silin's shoulder sank. Hui Mao ran over and squatted on Silin's shoulder. He raised his foot and tapped Silin's face. Silin, can I change my form and go out to fight later? Hui Mao's eyes lit up. This guy was looking forward to the upcoming battle. Silin swatted Hui Mao's paw away. You didn't even clean up the fish biscuits after scooping them up. It smells like fish. As he spoke, Silin suddenly paused. He looked at Hui Mao and lowered his eyes. No one knew what he was thinking. Wheeze, do you think you're the only cyborg in the entire League of Stars? Silin asked. Huh. Hui Mao, who was licking his paw, was puzzled. Didn't you guys say that the stable state of cyborgs basically doesn't exist? If I hadn't eaten that unknown thing, I wouldn't have been able to transform so smoothly. What if there's another cyborg that's as stable as you and can transform smoothly? Hui Mao narrowed his eyes and said with a deep look, If it's not a friend, then it's an enemy. If it's an enemy, I'll kill it. Silin, Is there really such a thing? I don't know. I just thought of asking. Sillin wasn't sure if the one on Wush's side was the same as Huemouse. Although the probability was very small in Sillin's eyes, the remaining probability couldn't be ignored. However, if it really was that small probability, Sillin couldn't imagine how Huimao would react when faced with a fellow that looked like a mouse. He would probably choose to eat it? What a headache. Sillin rubbed his forehead. What's wrong? Huimao asked. Nothing, I'm just thinking too much. Oh, don't think too much. You'll turn into an idiot, Huimao said in a serious tone. Sillin. When Sillin returned to the command room, the A-team had already sent out a warning signal. It seemed that the negotiations weren't going well. They had only talked for a short while and they were already starting to get restless. Should we get ready? Carrie shook his arms. There was a thruster at the joints of his arms and legs. There was also a retractable device on his back. Shimu had decided to add a few pieces of equipment to Merciless' suit of armor. This way, they wouldn't have to rely on any other tools to fly in space. Moreover, the suit of armor was very sensitive. The faster a member's reflexes were, the better they would be able to utilize the suit of armor. Let's get ready. Before Sillin could finish his sentence, he received a call from the A-team starship. After accepting the call, an image appeared on the screen. To everyone's surprise, it was one of the 3 vice commanders, and the only vice commander who had come to this meeting, Stanley. Stanley looked very serious. After the communication was connected, he went straight to the point. I need the leadership of your starship. I'll take over later. While Stanley was speaking seriously on the light screen, Whis had already left a few claw marks on the table beside him. Give up the starship? Why the hell? Are they trying to steal my territory? Do these people have a death wish or something? Cheto poked Huimao, who was gradually losing control of his emotions. He shook his head and motioned for him to calm down. At first, Stanley thought he'd have to waste a lot of time trying to convince him, but he didn't think that Sillin would agree right after he was done talking. However, he also made some demands. Stanley looked a little impatient, but he didn't care about Sillin's demands at all. Right now, his main goal was to take over Sillin's starship and protect the person on it. Alright, I'll send someone over in 2 minutes. Stanley ended the call after that. Why did you give up Little 11, Commander? What's the meaning of the A-team taking over right now? We may not have a lot of people, but we're still a squad. They can't just take our starship away even if they look down on us. We built our own starship. Why should we give it to them? It's not like the A-team lacks it. Fuck, isn't he just a vice commander? Why should he take our starship? Carrie and the others were very dissatisfied with Stanley's decision. The B squadrons of Vanguard had always been independent and never interfered with each other's business. Although the A-team had the right to assist in the management of the B squadrons, that was all they were allowed to do. The reason why a Freedom Starship was called a Freedom Starship was because of its freedom. It wasn't like the military, where the orders of the higher-ups were strictly enforced. Not even the commander of AB squadrons could say no to their commander's request. But the problem was that Sillin had agreed to it. No matter how dissatisfied they were, they still trusted Sillin after spending so much time with him. That was why they waited for Sillin's next order after they were done complaining. They believed that Sillin had his reasons for making such a decision. Get ready, everyone. Carrie and the rest of you will fly the fighter jets out of here. Mogaz and the rest of you will stay behind. Of course, we won't give them our fighter jets. Damn it, this is blatant exploitation. Carrie grumbled as he left with Xiao Shang and the others. However, the way they looked at Mogaz and the rest of the B squadrons didn't look too good. Stanley had said on the hologram that the 5 new members would stay behind and the others would be free to do as they pleased. In other words, the others could either leave or stay behind and be at Stanley's mercy. What the hell? The conflict between the A-team and the B squadrons had always existed. Many A-team members looked down on the B squadrons unless they were particularly capable, like Songba Leruo and the others. However, people like Shotten didn't fare as well in the A-team as the B squadrons imagined. He thought that the situation would improve after the A-team was demoted, But Carrie couldn't help but feel extremely displeased when he recalled Stanley's tone just now. That was why Carrie vented his displeasure on Mogaz and the rest of the B squadrons. Mogaz looked aggrieved, but the 5 of them didn't say anything. Sillin had a feeling that they knew something. Sillin took out another spaceplane. This was the one Shikai and the others had built through practice. Sillin had Dias's youngest son, Mo Heng, Shikai, and Shi Mu board it. Part of Shikai's mech army was also inside. Once the battle began and the spaceplane was safely away, Sillin wouldn't have to worry about their safety. Sillin had a private conversation with Shikai and Shi Mu, but no one knew what it was about. After the spaceplane left, Sillin arranged for the rest of the B squadrons to return to the spaceplane. There was another modified spaceplane on the starship, so Sillin had the rest of the B squadrons board it and the rest of the fighters move inside as well. 11th, keep an eye on this place. Don't let anyone go to the places I told you about, Sillin said. All right. 11th sounded a little sad. Don't worry, we'll be back soon. We haven't abandoned you. Sillin turned around and saw Hui Mao dragging his locker into the spaceplane. Behind him, Cheto was even helping him carry a few things like his furry cat nest. We's, we're just leaving for a while. We're not moving. No, I don't trust them. Hui Mao dragged his precious locker into the spaceplane without looking back. Seeing Hui Mao's reaction, Shueqiu and the others also started moving their stuff. They were afraid that their treasures would be taken away. Stanley was the one who was going to take over the starship when he said he was going to send someone to take over. He didn't think that the vice commander would come to take over the starship himself instead of helping G-Phone. Stanley didn't pay attention to the others' movements. He only looked at the 5 Mogaz's group of 5 when he arrived. After giving Sillin a nod, he walked toward the command center with his men. After that, Sillin made a gesture in the air and said, "We're leaving now. Keep an eye on this place, 11th." After Sillin boarded the spaceplane took off and left the starship. For the first time in their lives, the 11th squad members felt bitter inside. It was as if someone had taken over their own home. Carrie didn't know why the A squad was doing this, but he knew a thing or two about a hunter's habits. For example, they wouldn't treat things that didn't belong to them as precious. Back when they were on the 11th squad starship, they made sure not to damage the walls around them even when they were fighting against each other. But would these people do the same? Would they take care not to shoot at the wall, kick the chair, or kick the table? The more Carrie thought about it, the more upset he felt. He decided to vent his pent-up anger and dissatisfaction on the enemies in the upcoming battle. Sillin told them that he would take back control of the starship, so they didn't retaliate. Otherwise, Carrie wouldn't be afraid of them even if they were the A squad members. On Stanley's side, after the A-team took over this small starship, they looked down on it at first, but gradually, they discovered some special things on this starship. For example, many places could not be accessed at all, and some places had access control. Stanley could not command the access control system, and the person who cracked the code could not do anything about it either. When someone threatened to shoot down the door, Phoebe sent him flying with a whip. The 5 of them wouldn't allow that to happen. Isn't it just a stupid starship? Do you really need to protect it so well? The person who was sent flying waddled over to them. Phoebe and the others didn't say anything. Stanley also told his men to be more careful. He was clearly going to accommodate the 5 of them. Vice Captain, there are many places on this starship that are sealed off. The lounges, workshops, and so on are all locked up, one of them said. I advise you not to barge in recklessly. Mogaz leaned against the wall and said to the group of people who were looking left and right. What if I barge in? The person asked. This time, Mogaz didn't answer. Instead, a childish voice answered, Then I won't hold back. On the other hand, Sillin was chatting with his men on the spaceplane. He told them about the new operation plan and some emergency measures. Sillin only ended the call after he received repeated assurances that they would execute the plan according to Sillin's instructions. What are those people trying to do, Sillin? Hui Mao was lying listlessly on its side, fiddling with a ball-shaped nut in front of it. It was worried about Sigma's indoor orchard on the starship. It was worried that the place it had rubbed its scent on would be destroyed by someone. That was why it couldn't afford to give up territory. Sillin stroked Huemao's fur. You'll know when the time comes. What if they destroy the starship? What about Little 11? What about Sigma's indoor orchard, your workshop, and my turf? The last sentence was the main point. Then we'll teach them a lesson as well. When the time comes, many people might enter our starship. Other than the people from Vanguard, there are also people from Navigator and others. No matter who they are, we'll teach them a lesson together. Huimao stood up and shook his fur. Yeah, we'll teach them a lesson together. We need to teach them a lesson. Of course. Beep, beep, beep. 3 alarms sounded, indicating the start of the battle. After these 3 alarms, an explosion occurred in a place on the planet, and a huge mushroom cloud rose. That was the place where the negotiations were taking place. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.